Hello and welcome to the NGE Shadowverse Open. We are in the Starforged Legends season of the Shadowverse Open, and it's a very exciting time because we are finally into the group stages. I am Rainey, and joining me on desk today is going to be Justin Carter and Alan Yao. We have the Mofu Mocha back with us. Oh my gosh. It's a rare sighting.
Times.
It's a rare sighting when you get Mofu on the cast. It's like, you know.
I don't spawn often, you know.
Yeah, it doesn't spawn very often. He's, when you open a pack, then it has that, like, exploding effect. Then there's, like,
That's right.
Mofu Mocha.
Still waiting for my alternate leader skin, you know.
Yeah, one day. I'll write to Cygames and say I demand you include an alternate skin for Mofu Mocha. So
I'll sign the petition.
The rarity will be 0.02%, just to make it a little more rare than some of the other leaders.
You have to pull all the others first.
Yeah, that's the way you do it. Let's take a look at the format for the tournament today and see where we are. As I mentioned, we are in the Invitational stage proper now. We've gone through the qualifiers. We've done the Contenders Cup and found the 3 players from Europe who will go to Tokyo, Japan for the World Grand Prix, and now we're just playing out the season. That means we are in round robins, which is very exciting because the format of the game changes a little bit, and the way that these players are going to have to face against each other changes a little bit. And through this process, we will find the top 6 from each group. There's 2 groups, Group A and Group B, and the top 3 from each will advance to the regional finals. I misspoke a little bit. Not top 6 from each group, top 3 from each group.
That's right.
Math, I can do it sometimes, not often, but it's.
We'll work on your charts later today, Rainey. No worries.
I don't wanna. Please don't make me do that. These players are not playing for nothing. There's, of course, prizing associated with it. So, there it is. Top 6, which is top 3 from each group. They've spelled it out for me because they knew I was struggling. Qualify into the regional final. And then the 4th place from each group gets $250 US. And that's kind of a money for their troubles. And then all competitors will earn the flare. And then in the regional finals itself, we get some cash prizing, and the NGE Shadowverse Open Starforged Legends Grand Champion flare will be given to the first place winner, $6,500. And then the prize pool delineates all the way down to 6th place. 6th place. You know, Exodium was bullying me before the broadcast. I don't know if you guys know this. He was bullying me. He was making me say things one letter at a time. Hey, English is my first language too, okay?
I'm just trying to help out, you know, just trying to be, just trying to keep everything clean, on the level.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. Whatever, man. I'm gonna fight him after this. Let's take a look at the groups and the standings here. Of course, standings not super telling since nobody has played a game yet, but here are the groups. Best Marmot, Fatina, Essia, Bad, Kionis, and Pain will be in Group A, and then Group B will be Meow, Dasvi, Sheepy, Mad Allen, Sizoni, and Akamaru Red. And that's how the groups are gonna shake out. So across the weeks, we'll start getting some games in and figuring out how these placements are going to change. And so I'm really excited for it. The groups look pretty interesting. One thing to note, of course, I think everybody's going to keep their eye out for Akamaru Red in Group B. Mm-hmm. That's going to be quite a dangerous group. But, I mean, the times are always changing, right? Yes. And, of course, I'm confident that Akamaru Red is going to be a very difficult player to defeat. But just not only a week, I guess, right? It's not been a week, and there have been some changes that have been thrown into the game. Some balancing factors here, and that's going to inform a lot of the deck building and a lot of what you see. Interesting tidbit, Dragoncraft has fallen off in popularity by an incredible amount, which maybe at some other point in the show I'd like to get your guys' thoughts on it, because I don't actually think too much was lost in the original ramp package, but we'll get to that. Our first match is going to be Best Marmot versus Fatina. And there you guys see the head-to-head here. Now, just as a note here, Unfortunately, because Best Marmot did not submit his decks on time, he's actually going into this match with a game loss penalty. So, unfortunate, but we do have to keep to the rules, and Best Marmot will be docked a game loss, but he'll still be able to fight out to see if he can come back and win against Fatina here. Let's take a look at some of the decks that they've submitted now. One of the things that I think is rising to prominence is going to be the Bloodcraft lists that are coming in today. There's a lot of them out there, a few different variations, but most of them are aggressive set. One of the cards that I want to focus on is Jormungand in Fatina's list, and I'm going to go ahead and ask Mofu to kick us off here and talk a little bit about this card. It's one of the newer cards. How does it fit into this list? We haven't really seen a ton of it.
I find Jormungand to be really interesting in that it's both difficult to build around, but it's also very rewarding if you can make a deck list that fits it. Because you get to see in Fatina's list here, he plays a really strong aggro package, can still manage that game plan, but Jormungand gives him the flexibility to transition into this really tough late game to grind out against any other matchup that might do fine against aggro, like mid-range or control.
Are there, so here we see the full list, and of course that title up there, Masochistic Blood, is the name that the players themselves have given the decks. So we kind of had some fun having them submit some deck names to tell us a little more about this. But what about the cards that surround Jormungand? As Mofu mentioned, kind of tough to build around. What do you identify here, Exo, that's kind of helping him get to this point where he can actually think about playing Jormungand?
Well, he's got the full suite, right? He's got every single thing that self-damages, especially the new card Snarling Chains. Just a very sweet new addition that Blood got. And ISMPI has mentioned many times how much he loves that card. What's interesting I see about the list is he's only running 2 Blood Wolves and not 3, and instead he's running a Bellringer Angel. I don't know what that's all about, but outside of that, I mean, he's even packing Blood Packs in his aggro deck. He's got the Demonic Ram plus the Blood-Fed Flower Bed combo. He's got Staircase to Paradise to refuel his hand, as opposed to using Caraboss. I think that's kind of one or the other. I think Staircase is a really fine option. I don't know how good it is in this type of a list yet because we haven't seen it.
It definitely is an interesting deck because we talk about a lot of these Bloodcraft decks being suited towards aggressive gameplay, right? And one of the things that does not clue in aggressive is playing an Amulet on one, right? That's not super indicative of like, oh, I'm putting bodies on the board to try to push face damage. But I think you also make a very good point about the Bellringer Angel. It does seem like a divergence again from being straight up aggressive and kind of giving yourself a few more options. I guess we'll just have to see if that's enough for Fatina to kind of, maybe he's just focusing on the mirror matches, right? Maybe he thinks he's going to be playing.
I want to see Bellringer Angel be like the play of the game. You know what I mean? Because sometimes it happens where you have that one ward and it protects your board, and then your opponent can't Evo trade properly. They can't do specific things. Maybe it's just to give him that one option in a tournament setting to say, hey, I need a ward this turn.
And he's definitely focused in on that, right? 3 of Spiderweb, and then the Bellringer. Also, the Bellringer cycles cards, right? Because on Last Word, it draws you a card. So
that's right.
Maybe he's kind of using that to both defend himself and get that card advantage that he won't necessarily have without Caraboss.
And with, yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Without Caraboss, he needs those tools. And I think Staircase is the natural fit. But of course, we see with the Bellringer Angel, he's got a few other things with the Blood Packs as well to draw some cards.
So here we go. Best Marma is going to be the new face here in the season against Fatina, second place finisher of Season 2. Not a pushover by any means. And it looks like Best Marma, or rather, Best Marma and Fatina are going to start out with their blood lists. So we're going to get to see. There's Staircase on one. Let's see how this plays out for him.
All right, Mofu, talk to me about this matchup. What do you think about Fatina's list? Do you think it has what it takes against a natural Caraboss aggro blood deck?
I think that while Jormungand has the promise of being able to last out really well versus aggro lists, this might be the one class where it doesn't matter nearly as much, because blood is less dependent on having a board to continuously do damage, especially in a list that runs Caraboss. So I guess it really just comes down to whether or not he can safely get to the Jormungand, and if it itself applies enough pressure at that point in the game.
That's fair. Okay, so I got a real question, because I ask everybody this who's been playing with this called Trial of the Gorgons. alongside Venom Fang Medusa. How do you like this card? Do you think it's better than Summon Bloodkin along with Vanya? Do you think it gives you like a new out that the deck never had before? Like, do you have any experience with it?
I have very rarely seen it, but when I saw it in this list, I had this idea that perhaps he's running it because he wants this list to be one that can transition very elegantly into the late game. And I suppose it does that better than the Bat package, which he doesn't really run much synergy for in the first place.
Right. That's fair. And interesting, had to play a Spiderweb Imp just for defense, but took 2 damage to do it. That's got to feel bad.
Mm-hmm. Already shot down very low here, and I don't believe he has much of any, aside from the Spiderweb Imp not hurting him, I don't think he has any particular Vengeance synergies in here.
Right. And with the 2 staircase, even like Arthur said before the match began, not very aggro-centric, doesn't really have enough followers to trade properly with the board. I think Best Marmot's just going to run away with this game. I don't really see Fatina coming back here.
Mm-hmm. Even with the ward here protecting him from a little last bit of damage, it doesn't really have a way to get this back, and I don't think that he's going to be able to get to his deck's mid-game plan in time to be able to withstand Marmot's transition to Karabos soon.
Mm-hmm. And I actually have an interesting thought too. So if you're playing Staircase, I understand the tokens. Like, I understand Trial of the Gorgons will allow you to generate 3 cards, 2 cards up front to pop with Staircase. What's interesting to me is that he's not also running Summon Bloodkin to also like aggressively pop these Staircases. So just interesting deck design to me.
Mm-hmm. I guess that really comes down to his choice of 2-drops. He runs 20 in the list, so perhaps if he was trying to fit it in, perhaps it was replaced by something else that he felt would either help him cycle through more options like Baphomet, or more of the 2-drops that injure him for more consistency with Jormungand later.
Yep. Makes sense. And Demonic Ram, we're definitely seeing more of these days. Just interesting synergy with Blood just so that you don't take extra damage. Really good in an aggro meta so that you just don't get too far behind too fast with your aggressive early game plays. I really like that card.
I think in theory, Demonic Ram is actually what makes the whole Jormungand idea not fall apart instantly.
That makes sense. Makes sense. Late in the game, it just gives you a way to trigger a whole lot of things in a single turn and just gain a bunch of health back.
Mm-hmm. A position that I usually see, or at least that I've personally been in before trying to make Jormungand work, is a position where if you're against aggro and they have the upper hand against you, then it's very difficult to actually both get to it and then also have the luxury to be dealing damage to yourself every turn.
You see this? Demonic Ram played against Urias will gain him life. This is pretty insane.
I actually adore this.
This is insane. Wow, making Urias a bad card in the mirror.
Mm-hmm. And I think Demonic Ram is also his only real source of healing in the list, and the fact that he didn't really need to draw any of his synergies to use it on just because of a Urias. I didn't realize this before, but I think that's actually his ace in the matchup so far.
That's pretty sick. Yeah, I didn't even think about that before this game. That's awesome. And yeah, Best Marmot showing how potent that is and just getting rid of that Ram. He's like, no more life gain, please.
To add to that, Marmot now, after seeing that go down, has another Urias in hand. And with how much Fatina is healed up, I guess the Sabura is also another source of it. The Karabos might actually not... He's not really in a good position to play it yet. It might be his only play next turn.
So forget what I said earlier. Fatina's showing just how much he knows this matchup. Like, he had Staircase pop. He's got another one popping soon to just refill his hand all the way back to full. And has plenty of options. He's got ward, he's got late game options, he's got burn, he's got more heal with this brewer. I'm blown away right now.
And it's not that often you see Blood, if it doesn't go for Karabos, it'll start to run out of options in the late game, but the Trial of the Gorgons gives him a lot to work with 2 additional Sathenas as well.
That's right. I'm sure he didn't want to see 2 of those off of both of the trials just because they're super expensive, but realistically, I think he's just in a really good spot to now run away with this game.
Even though Karabos' effect is active, I don't see Marmot actually finding the damage he needs after that Demonic Ram just restored so much of his defense with that Urias.
So close. If he had one more Razor Claw, he'd be able to end it, but he doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think he's going to be able to survive this crackback. And that
Right.
bell ringer angel there just in case, you know? Just like, hey, you know what? Even if I was scared, I could play this bell ringer angel. No implanters for you. Sorry, bro.
I've just noticed that it's animated, and like as we've been trying to figure out what role it plays in the deck, now that I see it's animated, I kind of feel like it's just there as a statement, as in he just wanted to add it.
That's right. It's that light bulb. Like, ding dong. Like, this is my deck. Check it out. It's freaking sweet.
Yeah, I don't see that. I can't really see much going wrong for Fatina after this point.
A worthy performance.
Yep. I mean, he only needs one more damage off of board, which we know he clearly has. In spades. Especially with the Jormungand effect.
I genuinely had thought Marmot was about to run away with this as well as you were saying earlier.
That's right. And Urius actually triggering Jormungand as well. Urius, terrible card in the mirror when you're playing against Fatina. Watch out.
I had always considered Urius to be one of the best cards in Blood as well. So that opened my eyes a lot.
Because of the game loss, Fatina actually has the match now. So all Fatina needed to do was win that game. He did. And that means Best Marmot is down.
So he took the win off of that Blood deck, and that performed far more admirably than, and purely based off that interaction with just Urius pinging, right? I think that was really the key in that particular game. And we actually got to see the Jormungand get its last word effect off. I mean, that was a really, really threatening deck. Let's talk a little bit about Demonic Ram, because I feel like that's one of the cards that has been, and you talked about the synergy between Demonic Ram and things like Ambling Wraith, but talk about more about how to include this card and kind of where to best utilize it, Exo.
Realistically, it's just if you have ways to self-damage, you're going to get value out of it, period. And then, obviously, as Fatina read the metagame, now that everything has shifted back to Boss Blood aggro, now that PDK's gone, it's just a really good card. Take Urius out of your deck, apparently. Play Demonic Ram. That's what you do. Because if you play Urius, you're basically saying, okay, I get to heal a bunch now, and then do whatever else I want to do. I want to keep that Urius in play because it actually affects me well. And Jormungand, we also saw it triggers off of your opponent's Urius as well. So it's just a really bad card to have in the mirror, apparently.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, is having the snakes, the tokens spawning as well, was just making Urius do work. You know, he was pinging a lot. And then the board state that you get from that, plus the healing advantage, that was just, it was just so much. And a really well-designed deck, a really good deck in the mirror.
Yeah.
And I feel
like I said, blew me away.
Yeah. Well, that certainly has been the strength of Fatina, as we saw demonstrated in Season 2, was his ability to build creative decks, identify against the opponents that he was playing with. This is probably where Fatina shined the most, but let's take a look at the standings real quick. Fatina is going to go up 1-0 in the group, and Best Marmot 0-1. Still a lot of games to play, and as we saw from last season, things can go crazy towards the end of it, right? We can have some insane kind of up-downs and tie situations. So this is not super indicative, but Fatina, great start. Already a very different story than Season 2. Let's take a moment to kind of remind you guys, if you want to follow any of the updates for the Shadowverse Open, or for anything Shadowverse related, any big announcements, events that the game is going to be at, or anything cool like Shadowverse Next, make sure you follow the social media channel at Shadowverse Game. That's going to be on Twitter. You can follow that channel and get all kinds of updates and cool tidbits of information. So make sure you do that. Also, all the casters are there on Twitter, so make an account, jump on, holler at us, start yelling at us, hey, I want to play Blood 2. How do I do it? Don't ask me, ask them. Don't ask me. I have no idea.
Play Demonic Ram. We learned this.
Play Demonic Ram. All right. Hey, we have a lot more tournament play to cover today, and there are a few more matches coming up. Next up on the plate is going to be Essia versus Pain, which is going to be very interesting to me because Pain is one of the newer players kind of in the season. Somewhat from what I gathered in the interview, he's actually probably somewhat of a veteran card game competitor. He seems to have a lot of the solid foundations, mechanics, and he said he just played Shadowverse for fun, and was willing to try his hand at joining a few tournaments, found himself to be one of the most successful players within the last few weeks or within this expansion. He's going to go to Tokyo, Japan for the World Grand Prix, so he's one of our representatives here, and he's absolutely devastating. But Essia, no pushover. Such a close run for him, and he was playing incredible that day. I feel like it was just kind of being stopped just short of it, with the possibility of definitely making. Yeah.
Twice. Yeah. That's like, Essia, I feel for you, man.
Yeah, and it's incredible. You know, I feel like that's not something that you can let pull you back. So I think Essie is going to be incredibly dangerous here. So this is going to be a tough match. But let's talk a little bit about some of the decks here. We've got a deck that Pain is bringing, and this one is incredibly popular as the meta has shifted back to aggro since the new changes. And we're going to be talking about Sword, right? Aggro Sword is something that's incredibly potent. And one of the key cards to enable that is Roundtable Assembly. We may have talked about this on and off, but this is one of the new cards that has been added in. It puts 2 random commanders that cost 3 play points from your deck into play, so you can control which cards those are. Mofu, talk to us a little bit about this card and how people are utilizing it and what are the most effective and dangerous ways that it can manifest itself.
I find that the main 2 uses I've seen of Roundtable Assembly, earlier we saw it with Mid-Sword with combinations of White Paladin and Mars, but this time around, I think both Pain and a lot of other Sword players this tournament are having it only pull Princess Juliet. So they're only looking to play it once per game. The other copy becomes much less useful after that, just because they want that turn 5 double storm. So what I find to be extra interesting about that is this was especially effective when Ephemera could be a follow-up, or it could be a follow-up into Ephemera. With that gone, we see this list has shifted a little bit towards just trying to get that damage and then finish afterwards with Alvidas, or perhaps set up some more with Kunoichi Master. So it might be a very different experience than the usual aggro sword we've been seeing thus far.
Talk to me a little bit more about that, Exo, and kind of, I suspect that they might be somewhat related, but what happened to Ephemera in the patch? And then also, what kind of sticks out to me is the inclusion of White General. It's not something that we typically see too much of, but what are the changes here?
Well, it's all curve up, right? So Ephemera curve up, Council of Card Knights curved up with their costs, so now they're just out. They're not fast enough for aggro swords. Now we see White General being slotted back in for the extra damage that Ephemera... I mean, it doesn't grant as much damage as Ephemera, let's be honest, but it is one of the best ways to push damage on turn 4. And then we see the full suite of Kunoichi Masters back in replacement for Council of Card Knights because it adds a huge amount of damage. It's not slow now. Council of Card Knights, of course, costing 6. Alvidas deals 3 damage as opposed to 1 the turn you play it, so just a natural fit. Unfortunately, those cards are out, but Aggro Sword, I feel like, really hasn't lost much. Council of Card Knights probably the biggest loss, but they still have Roundtable Assembly into double Juliets. They still have Kunoichi Master. They still have Alberts. They still have all of the tools that they need to deal explosive amounts of damage.
And really, that Roundtable Assembly was kind of their one key card previously that was able to provide them some amount of stability, right? And extend them into kind of a mid-range sort of list in some edge case scenarios, right? It just gave them that additional flexibility. So now that that's not an option, I feel like it's just cutting out the lower end of the deck of like, oh, I need a safety net, but you're still maintaining the aggressive edge of the deck. Maybe the biggest pain point is not having the Bane.
Well, now you just don't have card advantage. Now you just have to push. It's all about pushing damage. You don't have this mid-game option. You don't have this stall option anymore. It's just, I've got to deal damage to face. I have no safety net anymore.
Hey, well, I'm sure some of you in Twitch chat know exactly what that strategy is going to involve. No, that's a popular one amongst a few.
That's right.
Tried and true. So here we go. Pain and Essia up against each other, and they are both running sword. There's just so much sword. Sword, blood, rune, everywhere. Everywhere, Exo.
That's right. So one quick question I want to ask you, Mofu. Have you seen Old Man and Old Woman in any deck yet? Can you tell me why you think Essia is playing it?
I actually have not seen Old Man and Old Woman yet, but I do have a theory as to why it appears, which is that one thing that Aggro Sword is particularly vulnerable to, especially in Aggro Mirrors, is they don't have a good turn 4 when going second, which is there are not very many reactive 4-drop cards. And Old Man and Old Woman can kind of fix this, in that it's capable of clearing 2 things and establishing a board advantage if it survives a series of 2 trades. It's a way to sort of stay relevant even if they have to play for a little bit more value. And so that's why I'm actually really pleased by its inclusion.
Awesome. And old man and old woman, I'm assuming is an officer, which would make it work with white general. So, and because it can attack 2 times per turn, we're talking about an on-the-play value play of old man, old woman into white general into 6 damage, which is pretty big.
I think it's actually a little ironic that Essia does run Old Man and Old Woman, but I think his list actually doesn't have the white generals.
Oh, he's not running the white generals. Okay, interesting. Okay, so probably a purely defensive option.
Though I really do love the into white general. I think that's a very, very cute way to curve it out. One thing I was actually about to mention that I observed about Payne's list is, although he runs 2 white generals, his list has a lot of commanders going into turn 4. So it's not really something that he can use as a very strong turn 4 some of the times, especially when he loses his place on the board here. A lot would be Essia, but...
That's true. And one thing that I want to keep making mention of is Bladed Hedgehog keeps finding more and more room in sword decks, whether they be mid, aggro, whatever. It's just starting to come through a lot more than it ever used to be, and I really like this. I think Bladed Hedgehog's crazy, and now everybody else thinks so too. I like it.
I think, especially with Forest kind of finding a bit of a footing, a lot of players had, within the past, like, general time frame, started to play Vanguard a lot more over Quickblader, and that led to the popularization of Princess Vanguard. And I think she taught people herself that the 1/3 stat line on a 2-cost follower is really, really useful. And that, I think, is what led to Hedgehog becoming so popular. And he's proven himself in, I think, almost every list we've seen.
And Essia deciding he's just too far behind, can't deal with the board, and just exiting out of that game. So Payne goes up a game in the mirror. All right, so here's another interesting thing. I think we have a lot of awesome stuff to talk about today because the format shifted. So we're back to seeing aggro Forest with Hyperia again, the 5-play point, 5/4 with Ambush. And we saw it a little bit at the beginning of the season when it was pure aggro, but now we've come full circle to where the format's changed. Control's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit. Maybe there's some more combo. We see a lot of D-shift and now just straight aggro lineups. And aggro Force being the ban from both players. So both players thinking it's the strongest aggro deck right now. Or maybe just the best against other aggro decks. Have you gotten a chance to play with the aggro Force list at all?
I have. Unfortunately, I was on the receiving end of it, and I completely empathize with banning it if these players' main game plans are going to be aggro, which is Forest has a special privilege called Wood of Brambles, which makes it nearly impossible to mount any sort of board against them in the early game. Not trading can lead to very, very tough punishes, and then not having board against Forest leads to a lot of very quick losses to Elf Song or the likes. So I feel that in a scenario where both players are going to be trying to play their aggro decks, Forest is just the one class you don't want to try to play that against.
That's just awesome. I love meta shifts, and aggro Forest being back on top seems awesome and very out of place to me. But that's why I think a lot of people are packing Uriases and things like that in case they need to let something like Forest through, which, again, we saw Fatina make perfect use out of with his basically counter deck to that. So it's a lot of metagaming going on today, and I think players are on top of what they need to be doing.
Absolutely. I'm actually still really impressed by that from before, as we see a lot of aggro lists don't really even just run Ram for the very reason that they don't really see it as a very high impact 2-drop, but
it doesn't do face damage.
Basically. But I think being able to throw together an aggro list that also has a game plan of how it can get an edge against other aggro lists in the mirror, I think is a really important part of handling all of these matchups, and I'm still just so impressed by the way Fatina did earlier.
That's right, and even players that we know mostly play either combo or control, like a Fatina. Later in the day, we'll see people like Sheepy playing even just full aggro lineups. Like, nobody today really had a penchant for bringing control except for Bad, which we'll get to, but this is like aggro all day, every day for all these players, and it's just it's crazy to me. People are like, I want to beat D-Shift, or I want to play D-Shift, and we'll see how it plays out through the course of the day. But getting back into this game, Pain, like we like to say, Pain. He likes to bring it, right? He's the pain train. He likes to bring the pain. And I feel like we're not gonna see him play anything other than aggro, and because it suits his playstyle very well. In the game state that we're in right now, talk to me. We've missed a couple plays here, but who do you think's got the edge at the moment?
We see Essia at a pretty significant life advantage, which usually is tied in aggro mirror to going first. But I'm actually thinking that this life advantage isn't going to mean very much for Essia coming up. Right now he has a very tough position where he can play out a lot of followers. He seems to be willing to commit all of them, perhaps, in an attempt to get as much as he can. But with only a Dance of Death left in his hand, all Pain needs to do is figure out a way to swing tempo against Essia once. And if he can manage to do that and survive, Essia's just about out of gas here.
Yeah. The one potential hazard I see is that Night Horde being the best option Pain has kind of stinks when Urius is sitting across the table. So there are good times for Urius as well, everybody. So don't think he's just a terrible card now. But yeah, I think this board with Urius, if Urius wasn't here and that was just another 1-2 or a 2-2, I think Pain would be in a great spot. But because it is specifically Urius, I think Pain is quite a bit behind here.
Mm-hmm. He has to pay 2 defense even just to play Night Horde, as it wouldn't be able to clear otherwise. I think removing as much damage as possible by hitting the 2-1 and evolving over the Urius is absolutely the best way to handle that turn. But it does put Pain just low enough that Essia could top deck just a little more reach. Bloodwolf being a very good example of that.
Yes, Bloodwolf being a prime example of that. As well as being cheap. One thing that I've always really liked about Bloodwolf in Blood is simply the fact that it top decked with any other spells in your hand with an evolution orb means crazy amounts of damage for very minimal card economy, essentially. Like Sword, in order to do it, has to combo specific cards together, or of course Albert, but that costs 5. But Blood can just put it together with a couple cards in hand with an evolution orb to just kind of push the game to a close.
And because of that, I think actually Essia's consideration here is playing the Dance of Death, because it's more likely if he holds the Wolf that he'll be able to play it with really the rest of his deck soon. But I was wrong. Decides to go for the Blood Wolf instead.
So this play makes a little less sense to me because A, you could save the second evolution orb for the Blood Wolf, and B, better play point usage like you were talking about, where Dance of Death this turn plus, or next turn Blood Wolf plus another spell with the evolution orb I think would have totaled more damage. So interesting line here.
Right. I suppose the difference between that and Dance of Death is he holds removal against something that he could be afraid of and develops one more body on the board. I think that it's a perfectly fine play, but it does mean that Essia is committing to a bit of a slower game plan. He's assuming that he gets the board swung back against him here if he loses everything, which, glancing at Pain's hand, isn't really something that I think Pain can do without committing a Razor Claw, which is really dangerous for him to do. Yes. Actually, now looking more closely at it, it's very difficult for him to get over the 3-4 stat line, which is very fortunate for Essia. But I think going for the Wolf and holding the Dance of Death is saying that he'd like to just top deck a little bit more damage in the future to have a little bit more of a safety net in the Dance of Death.
Speaking of dealing with the 3-4, I was thinking about the line from Pain to just Dance of Deathing this turn and running into the Wolf. And just kind of like hoping my opponent doesn't have it, leaving the 1-drop in play, but apparently he thinks leaving the 3-4 in play is more optimal.
I think if he had gone with the Dance of Death route, he could have prevented a lot more damage. He puts himself in a situation where the Razor Claw in his hand isn't going to be a very good tool coming up.
Right.
As we know with this Dance of Death, he won't be able... That's effectively lost from his hand because of this play. But in doing so, he does get the board back for the time being, assuming that Essia doesn't turn around and decide to trade when Pain's only at 6 remaining.
Right. I mean, we've seen crazier things happen, but 1 is not 0. And if Pain does go to 1 here and takes back board control, it could just be that Essia doesn't find another point of damage and just draws, you know, Curse Brand Vampires and things like that, maybe more Vites and just not any direct damage, so...
Indeed. Interesting evolve here. Okay, it seems that he is definitely going to commit this 3-4 face. I'd say there's very little reason not to. But I'm contemplating how different that turn may have looked had he held the Blood Wolf rather than the Dance of Death.
This turn makes a little bit more sense to me. This essentially says I want you to play your Razor Claw, and then I can just kill you with my Dance of Death. Also, it gives me an out if I'm Essia to deal with Caraboss evolved, which I would have no other way to deal with. That card is just massive. So.
At any rate, we see Essia in a position where just the slightest bit of damage would be enough, and Urias almost promises it, but he is then on board. Though that does go in for a pretty decent trade against the 3-1. Or
That's right.
he would hope that it could.
So this is... Wow. Chooses not to Dance of Death that and sacrificing board position to do this. I feel like this kind of takes him away from a lethal setup next turn. Never mind.
Perhaps.
Dance of Death would be lethal, but... Oh, there it is.
Mhm.
You can see
I think
Essia's
plays.
elation.
Yeah, Essia's plays have now started to make a lot more sense to me. He had a lot of turns and a lot of time to find just a little bit of damage he needed, whereas Pain had lost a lot of tools from his hand just due to that life disadvantage.
That's right. I feel like if you do have the life advantage, you have room to make more plays. So Essia definitely had a train of thought about how he wanted to deal damage over time. I really feel, though, that Blood Wolf play, the first Blood Wolf play over the Dance of Death, might have cost him a turn. And that turn is all you need in this sort of matchup, right? Like, say, for instance, he drew a Vite that turn, as opposed to a Caraboss or something that dealt damage, he just loses. However, if he plays the other way, he actually gets to win that turn, and there is no chance to top deck into a brick.
Right. So in a situation like that, I suppose holding the Dance of Death meant that he wanted to score at least a lot of value out of it. So, very interesting. I think I've actually seen Essia play like this before. Even in an aggro matchup, he wants to try to hold his tools like Dance of Death for the best time that he could, even if it means taking a turn away from an aggro game plan.
That's right. And I don't mind that. Like I said, it's probably one of your only, if not best option to deal with an evolved Caraboss. And if you can't deal with that, you probably just die in one swing with it. So, definitely not a terrible option. Alright, so we see both players going out swinging. Pain does not have a 2-drop yet, though. Ooh.
I think that's a very tough position to be in when faced with one of the Goblin equivalents, in this case being Perseus, into the Princess Vanguard. I think even just putting the 1-3 on board and pushing another 2-face here puts Essia in a fantastic position. But he goes for the Kunoichi training here.
I honestly think any of the plays are good now. Missing a 2-drop, especially when you're on the play, in an aggro matchup, hurts so bad because if you start having to be the defensive player when you're on the play, and you have less evos than your opponent, it starts to feel really bad over time. And I'm sure Pain feels that.
Losing tempo when going first is actually something that I learned from Take 2 is one of the worst positions a person can be in. But the Vite, I think, does a good job of at least holding a bit of damage off and mounts a body. So playing out one of his storms on turn 3 for Essia is a fair amount of damage, but it's not a very strong board position.
Also decides not to trade. So Essia is now assuming the aggro player's role and saying, you know what, you're going to make the trades, I'm going to be the aggressor. And this is where he's got to start thinking. I mean, he can keep pushing face. He's got plenty of it. He's got Novice Trooper, he's got Juliet, he's got Albert in hand. He's got Kunoichi Trainee, which can't be targeted by anything in Pain's deck.
Blood has no way of dealing with that other than praying that Vite is enough to encourage a trade.
Right.
I think Essia at this point forward, after committing the Juliet face and not trading earlier, at this point, as you said, he's deciding he wants to use every single evolution or bond face damage here. He has the tools necessary for it. Though it's not going to end up being enough without some extra tool off the top, such as an Alvi does. So it is yet to be seen whether Essia is going to be able to stay on that line.
Right. He might have to shift here. And Pain has plenty of resources.
I think we might actually see one of the biggest swings that's going to take place in a matchup like this be dependent upon how much value Pain gets out of the Scarlet Sabreur, because cards like that can just, even a single copy can ruin the aggro game plan here. And as you can see, he has an astounding board dominance at this point, due to the way Essia has decided to approach this game.
That's right. And normally for Blood, it's very hard, and we don't see Sabreur in a lot of aggro decks, and Pain opting for it. But it gives him a perfect option to answer Albert, where Blood normally doesn't have one. Usually they have to play a Dance of Death. But Scarlet Sabreur gaining life as opposed to dealing damage could become very helpful in this matchup to just maybe save off a turn of lethal damage.
I think pulling a 1-drop off the top now could be huge for Essia. It gives him a target for his Princess Vanguard. It gives him an alternative option on how to play out 5 play points rather than just slamming the Albert. And setting up the Kunoichi trainee to attack alongside an Albert or Alvidas or even just Juliet next turn could be a lot of damage. I think the Sabreur is going to need to come down soon no matter what Essia does.
That's true. I really like that point. So yeah, if Quickblader, aka Taji, comes down alongside Princess Vanguard and Kunoichi trainee, basically Essia is just counting damage. How much damage can my opponent realistically deal to me? Can he kill me next turn? If not, I'm going to go face. If so, then I'm going to trade a little bit, but it looks like he's just going face here. He says, you can't kill me. I'm not worried.
I find the choice of Juliet to be interesting, just because I think the Taji and the Princess Vanguard mounts a little bit more work for Pain to do trade-wise. But without knowledge of the Sabreur in hand, actually, never mind. I think holding that one actually kept just a little bit more damage to play alongside Albert. Sometimes Albert just becomes invisible to me when I focus on everything else in a sword player's hand.
That's right, and this is exactly lethal damage the way that Essia set it up. So perfect setup, even through the Sabreur, getting that lethal damage in. And Essia taking his first win of the round robin, showing that he's no slouch. Pain, you're a new guy. You got to learn the ropes. Come back next week.
Essia will win 1-0 against Pain, and that was oh, did he just notice lethal? What happened there?
Maybe he didn't know he had lethal, and then he's like, wait a minute, I have a 6 play point.
He kind of threw up his hands and was like, oh. And he played it.
Lost until that point.
He's probably like, how do I trade best here? And then he's just like, wait a minute, I got this.
But what's interesting is, if my memory serves me right, Pain vs. Essia was one of the kind of obstacles that Essia had to overcome and failed to in the Contenders Cup, and now he's been able to kind of earn that revenge. But that's what's really so interesting about the round robin stages, right? When you're kind of submitting your decks and kind of identifying your opponent's playstyles and trying to target them specifically, as opposed to trying to build a deck that's going to work for a general purpose situation, you get some very different interactions in the sense of really highlighting a player's ability to research and prepare and kind of deck build. So I think that's a big win for Essia there.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's take a look at the standings to see how things have shifted and changed. And 2 matches out of Group A have been decided here. So Fatina and Essia are both going to be 1-0. Meanwhile, Pain and Best Marmot start off the round robin 0-1. And like I said during the match between Fatina and Best Marmot, no big deal, right? It's not the worst in the world. There's still so many more games to play, and eventually when we get into that 3-2 scoreline territory, or even 4-1s can happen quite commonly. Despite the fact that they're on the bottom of the group now, that may not be the case very, very soon. So still a lot of games to be played. Next match coming up is going to be Bad vs. Kionis, and that's going to be very interesting. This is the only matchup, I think, where the game pace is going to be a little bit slower than what we've seen so far, and really what we'll see today. And there we see the deck lineups here, and it looks like Forest is going to go through. Now, one interesting thing about Forest, and I think a lot of people will come to realize here, especially in the European round robin, and there were a few in North America that I saw, is there's a particular card that's found its way into the meta, at least into the tournament meta, and that's the Ferry Driver. the Fairy Driver has found its way into the meta. Almost every single Forest Craft list that's playing kind of the Fairy aggro lineup is using Fairy Driver, and I guess that would make sense because you know, just put one and one together, right? You got a lot of fairies, especially with brambles, right? It's very difficult to even remove the fairies, and so that becomes a very good card for you.
Let's not take it too far, okay? It's not a centerpiece of any of these decks.
Sure.
All right, it's not like Fairy Driver is not like the reason you play Forest. It's just that one extra thing post Evo that you can do to kind of push an extra couple face damage or trade a little better or something like that. Yeah.
It's really highlighting the fact that the deck is so centered around kind of those token cards now, right? Where you generate just so much value off of anything that kind of helps them. So we'll get to see that list in just a bit, but let's take a look at the featured deck here, and it's going to be a particular card. It's going to be Bad's Shadowcraft list, and in that list she is running Twilight Queen, which is a very interesting card. It kind of gives you this effect when Twilight Queen is destroyed. It makes your next last word ability activate twice, and this is within the context of a last word, obviously. Shadowcraft deck. What are some of the synergies that you can be looking for here? How do you feel about this particular card, Mofu, in terms of effectiveness and usage? And is it something that you would have expected to see in tournament play? Is this something that's normal for Shadowcraft lists nowadays? How do you feel, Mofu?
I'm actually very surprised by it, because where my usual experience with Twilight Queen is just simply Attendant of Night is now going to get Erded and summon 2 to 3 liches, and I'm going to concede to that. Bad's list is actually much more value-oriented. The last words that she's running at the very smallest is going to be Belinus, but I imagine she's dodging effects like that, which makes me think this Twilight Queen is trying to go off on a Kawi or a Mordecai. It can be pulled by Nephthys. I'm not sure if it activates immediately, but putting a Mordecai on the board means he can be the next successor to that effect. I think this Twilight Queen doubles as something to do in the mid-game, as well as something that just solidifies as a win condition. I think the list is actually banned from this game, so we can't see that right away, but I think it's very creative, it's very cool, and I am terrified to see it in the future, considering she's also running Test of Strength in here.
Oh yeah, that was definitely one of the highlight cards that I saw.
Test of Strength is almost not seen ever now, but perhaps one of the most annoying with the particular deck running Dark Alice. I know a lot of people have had a lot of grievances with that particular scenario, but I mean, I suppose it would work well with Mordecai too, right? I mean.
Oh, and by the way, Mofu, Twilight Queen will pop immediately, and it's kind of like Roundtable Assembly, where, you know, the order of Mars into what matters. It also matters if Twilight Queen comes out first before the Mordecai or the Kawi, and then it will pop twice, which makes it awesome. It's also just a good setup for it. And the biggest other use in the deck is to set up a big Lurching Corpse with like Soul Conversion turns so that you can just get extra value.
What do you think, Exo? And so far, nobody has found a particular method of kind of controlling what cards like Nephthys or Roundtable Assembly will pull, correct? And so you're really just hoping that it just does the Mordecai, for example?
You're hoping. Realistically, if you set it up with a Nephthys, you can't really have a bad effect. You're gonna get something. I guess Belinus is possible, so maybe limiting Belinus from your deck could help, and maybe something that Bad doesn't really care about. She's just like, if it works, it works. If not, that's fine. But yeah, I mean, it's a very potent card. I've used it to a lot of success in Nephthys, and I think it's great.
How do you feel about, and I guess maybe if either you or Mofu have a strong thought about this, how do you feel about Nephthys within the context of what people are bringing in this current tournament meta with everything being so aggressive? Do you think it's a list that can survive, or no?
It's tough.
I'm gonna put my money on yes.
Okay.
Oh, ooh, okay. All right. I feel like we were having some dividing opinions here.
So I think it's perfect for the tournament if this was a Swiss tournament. If she got to play every single one of the competitors today, I think she might actually win. I think her lists are positioned to do well against all the aggro decks that are out there. But she was read properly by her opponent, and her opponent is bringing all 3 combo decks, which perfectly counter control decks. So I think she needs to learn now that she's in the round robin stage. People can metagame against her specifically, and that's exactly what's happening here today.
How do you feel about it, Mofu?
I was thinking that it looks like a versatile enough list to me as compared to other control lists that, like, for example, like Blood might take a much longer time to win a game. I think this one has a very solid, I want to win the game as soon as turn 8 hits kind of game plan, so I really like this sort of thing. But we won't be seeing it this time around, so I'll have time to prove that in the future, I suppose.
That's right. So we actually get to start this game off. Kionis brought one of my favorite decks of all time in OTK Dragon. So a combo deck that's outside of the norm, but aims to win with Wildfang Dragon Nuke, which is a 2-play .22 that says whenever you discard a card, your opponent takes damage, alongside of Altered Fates. And it just tries to assume this heavy hand size into a combo turn with multiple Wildfang Dragon Newts into Altered Fate and possibly into a second Altered Fate to just win out of nowhere on the spot. I love this deck.
I'm a huge fan of it as well, and also this is one of the funniest lists I've ever seen for it, and that I wasn't expecting to see things like Night's Way. I wasn't even aware that the list benefited much from Trail of Light, but
right.
This list is just all in on the combo. It is saying, I don't want to do anything but the combo. I have no other game plan, really, aside from some additional damage for finishing from IFA, or little things like that. But seeing it against this kind of matchup, where this is the closest thing I've ever seen Bad played that I could call not completely control, because there's a combo involved in it. It's like we're seeing a combo deck that is entirely dependent on just drawing and then just tossing all of its cards, rather than trying to develop any kind of control of the game, versus Bad's, which wants to develop a control of the game first, and then make it to turn 10 and use just a very simple 3-card combo to deal a lot of damage.
Right, and what Mofu's referencing is Bad's running 3 Queen of the Dread Seas, 3 Genesis Dragons, and 3 Ariads in her Ramp Dragon list. So this is basically a very similar game plan to Kionis, as in draw as many cards and ramp as early as possible, and then throw my hand away and see if I win.
I've never actually thought about I've never actually thought about this matchup before, but now that I'm staring at it, I want to call it as this is going to be a battle of consistency. I think both decks have very strong combos behind them. I've died to one a lot more than the other, one might imagine. But I think when they're faced off against each other, neither has a very strong early game plan. It's all going to come down to whether Kionis can get to his pieces before Bad can just simply get the play points to play out hers.
And one of the things that happens a lot with OTK Dragon is it can just beat itself. Either A, you draw too many Altered Fates in the same hand, or B, you don't get to chain into your Altered Fates in a proper way, and sometimes you just have to go for the combo, and if you don't get your second Altered Fate, you just don't win the game anymore.
That's I find that weakness to be a particularly adorable explanation to his playset of Mystic Rings he runs in here.
Yes. Mystic Ring is a very great new card.
I think, well, the card is a 1-cost card that allows you to banish a card from your hand, and a copy of that card gets shuffled into your deck, and then you draw a card to replace it. I think this actually is the most useful list in which Mystic Ring I've ever seen it be incorporated anyways.
100%. I think any deck with Altered Fate is Mystic Ring centric. 1, it's just really good to put Altered Fates back in your deck. But 2, if you're playing an Altered Fate deck, you're probably playing some sort of a combo, in which case you don't really want to be drawing anything in abundance. Like maybe you want to put the PTP back because you can't afford to Altered Fate it, or if you're playing this sort of a list, maybe you put a Wildfang Dragon Newt back in your deck so you have an option to draw a third one later and not give up all 3 on your first Altered Fate combo. So it just gives you a lot of room to breathe.
We see one copy here. We see Kionis has found his first Altered Fate as well, but he's still assembling the pieces. And I feel pretty confident to say that Bad already has Queen of the Dreadsea. She has 3 copies of the other 2 pieces of Genesis Dragon and Ariat coming up, and she's already been able to deal the damage through the Ayelas to guarantee that even without an evolution point, that's going to be enough to seal the game if she can get to it.
Yep, that's very important to note, actually. OTK Dragon, not great at being able to deal face damage early unless you let their followers survive. So one of the best strategies against it is just to not let them do it, so it forces them to have to get lucky and combo you. Whereas Bad's able to do this damage and, like you said, just win with her combo outright without needing a full hand of 9 cards, without needing to draw into an Altered Fate, but still has to get there.
So I wonder, Kionis here probably is aware that Bad is pretty quickly approaching the play points that she needs to be at. So I suppose he's going to go for the play that offers him the most search he can get. Probably trying to find his Dragon Newts out soon, but I'm completely wrong. He goes for the Ifa.
Yep, and Kionis is actually in a really rough spot for Dragon at this point. He's only got 4 cards in his hand, which is not anywhere near the amount of cards you need in your hand for a combo with Wildfang Dragon Newt. So he's kind of going to have to play this slow game and hope to chip with this Ifa, probably hoping that it just stays alive and Bad doesn't have an answer to it.
Mm-hmm. So comically enough, I actually found that to be really interesting. I think Bad could have preserved a couple of resources had she just gone for the Breath of Salamander, but she shows us that she puts a lot of value into developing another Ayala here.
Yeah, and I like it. It also shows us that Bad is willing to throw her hand away. I think if you play three Queen of the Dreadseas in your deck, that's kind of like your mindset. Yeah, I don't really care about all the other stuff in my hand. Like, I just want to win the game when I have my combo. But even plays before Queen of the Dreadsea, you know what? I'm just going to deal my damage. I don't care about my hand size because I'm going to throw it all away anyway. So please just get there.
I suppose Bad's also trying to just simply play out to being able to reach Bahamut, or Dreadsea as you said, knows that if she can get enough damage off of this Ayala, even just another evolved hit face, or if Kionis fails to deal with the evolved Ayala at this point, then she'd be putting Kionis into just Genesis Dragon range. She wouldn't need combo pieces after that.
Right. Absolutely correct. But Kionis has managed to ramp a bunch this game. Bad not. But with these threatening Ayalas, Kionis is probably going to have to start dealing with it. And I think that's why we saw the Evo from the Goblin Mage here to just stem off some of this bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
Which in turn will ramp Bad.
Kionis has developed an enhanced Knight's Way. He's going to get to he's going to get to what he needs soon, or at least the setup for it when Altered Fate. Still needs to search a few more Dragon Newts to get a lot of damage off of it if he wants to get it consistently. But Bad is just getting closer and closer here.
Yep, and this is basically just a lethal board. Kionis out of Evolution Orbs, has no removal cards at hand. He's in a rough spot.
I'm noticing now he doesn't really run anything that clears boards in this list, nothing along the likes of Breath of the Salamander. The only removal spell, or dedicated removal spell I see, is Avowed Strike, next to some followers for it, like Dragoon Scyther and Star Phoenixes. But not probably the best time to draw an Altered Fate. This is actually where I see a deck that uses Altered Fate as a central part of its win condition actually loses out on one of the most interesting facets of Altered Fate as a card, which is that sometimes when you don't have the option you need to answer something, you can Altered Fate and try to draw another huge amount of cards. That would be refreshing for a hand of 6 more to find an answer. But I think his deck he built it without trying to go for that kind of faculty with it. It's very hard to do that with something like Dragon Newt. But I think he's in a position where he has to try to find something anyways.
Yeah, well, he has no time to wait. So I think the play this turn is to Dragon Newt plus Altered Fate and Pray, and just see what happens. But yeah, as you say that, I'm thinking about PTP Forest. And PTP Forest, you never really care about Altered Fating your hand away. You're just like, you know what? I don't have the options I need. I'm just going to throw it away. We're fine. But its combo is based on doing that, whereas Dragon's combo is based on having to have the Altered Fates in order to combo.
Manages to go for a little bit of healing here. Has an Avowed Strike that he can use afterwards, but only 2? Okay, now 3 Dragoncraft cards in hand. Not able to deal with the Scyther.
And that's just it.
Alright, simply passes it. Probably at that point decides.
I think he ran out of time. I think that's what the hands on the head means. We've seen that from Bad, actually. Last week, where Bad was running out of time a couple of turns, just very complex turns, didn't really know what to do on fast enough, and then just ran out of time, and it cost some games. And now we're seeing the pressure hit Kionis.
Well, I don't blame him, and I empathize a lot with that expression. That looked like a pretty difficult turn to navigate, especially with a deck as complex as this.
Yeah, that's one thing that's kind of understated. I know we say it a little bit with Forestcraft, Forest combo's pretty hard with the math and all that kind of stuff. If you're playing any version of a combo deck, that doesn't have an outright way to win, such as an aggro deck, right? Or just a control deck. I've controlled the board, now I have a big follower, I'm going to win. These combo decks, you have to find interesting ways to deal with board states all over the place. And sometimes it just takes a lot of your mental faculties to come up with that, and sometimes it takes just a little bit too long.
So, at any rate, I think that it's definitely not over for Kaiunis. Unfortunately, I actually think that he had some interesting lines of play he could have gone for, though I think that knowing the Scyther was coming off the top for bad later might have not made it matter. Kaiunis is now going into, I believe it's a Roach Forest list.
Yes.
Which I think is going to do, or at least may particularly do well versus Bad's lists here.
Can opt to play the same deck, so not really a huge... Okay. Yeah, so does opt to do this. But Bad going into this matchup now with a Control Blood deck, much slower than the Dragon deck she just played. And I feel like this is going to be the test. Can Bad win with her Control Blood deck against either of these combo decks? And I think she's a dog in both matches. I mean, it's really going to have to pull together here with these Mask of Black Deaths, I think, on the appropriate times.
I agree. I think Mask is actually going to be the single most crucial part of either matchup. It sometimes isn't enough against Roach. You can just shrug it off. They have a lot of ways to continue in the game. But I think after this, if Kaiunis pulls this game off, it'd be very interesting to see the interactions between Mask and the Altered Fate combos.
Yes, that's very interesting, because realistically, the only time you know they can just kill you with the combo when you're playing the Dragon deck, or playing against it rather, is when they have 9 cards in hand and they have 8 play points or more. That's basically double Dragon Newt into Altered Fate, and that's over 20 damage. So with knowing that, Kaiunis can kind of play around with Bad for a couple turns while that Mask of Black Death isn't on the table.
I suppose we'll see a lot more room for Kaiunis to essentially turtle with the sheer amount of card draw that is in that other list. But for the time being, I think Kaiunis has a lot of ways to approach this game quite comfortably. I think Control Blood has always been one of the main parts of the food chain that Roach likes to prey on.
Yes, absolutely. I remember the very first time that I played Control Blood against Force, and I was just like, of course Mask of Black Death didn't exist then, but in the back of my head I'm just like, how do I win? How do I stop them? I can play a ward, I have maybe some Goblin Mount Demons in my deck or something like that, but then they have Dance of Death, right? They have Dance of Death to answer your singular ward, then they just reset the turn and you're at 2 less life. Now what answer do I have? Crap. How am I going to stop this combo?
And worth mentioning is, like, that was the era of Goblin Mount Demon, which we've passed. She doesn't actually play a single follower with Ford here. She has 2 Masks of the Black Death, and that's it for damage mitigation. All the other mitigation she has is all just going to be in healing.
Interesting to note, only 2 Mask of Black Deaths. Most of our Control Blood players have been playing up to 3 because of how often we talk about it being the most integral part of the matchup. But Bad's saying, you know what? I don't need that many.
Interesting to just go for a flat Righteous Devil here.
I like it just to get board presence. One thing that Combo Roach is not known for is creating big board presence. It basically just does 1 follower at a time until it starts going into its combo turns. So if you can develop a really wide board presence, especially with a slower deck like what Bad is playing, you can kind of put pressure on Kaiunis to maybe use his Evo points a little bit more defensively instead of saving them just for Roach pokes, which is definitely good. And Righteous Devil's no slouch. It's a 2/5 for 4.
Right, it's a very sturdy stat line. Doesn't even occur that frequently in the game now that I think about it.
No, it's not often. We see it with some cards that nobody plays yet, like Assault Werewolf, which is also in Blood, which I still want to see. I think that card's great.
I agree with you there.
But yeah, the stat line is great. Vist, also a Forest card, 4 play point 2/5 with Ward. It is not often played, especially now because most Forest decks are aggro or combo oriented. But also good stat line and great card.
Right. My favorite healer in the game actually has the stat line, that being Veteran Alchemist from Rune. But
Yes.
we can see this 2/5 stat line, even though Kaiunis evolved Ancient Elf, without Wood of Brambles, it wouldn't have been able to trade into it. So that diverts Kaiunis into simply letting Bad choose what she wants to do with it, and he commits for the face damage instead. I think the sturdiness of this line is like, or of this stat line, has a lot that it can show off in a matchup like this.
That's right, especially against Wood of Brambles. Normally, you can't even trade around with that card, right? But the stat lines that Bad is producing here is able to trade effectively and not even lose the Righteous Devil if she chooses not to. So, I really like playing that on turn 4. I think that's a very smart move, and especially because this is not a matchup whatsoever that you want to play Belphegor in. Even if you have a Mask of Black Death in your hand, setting yourself at 10 against a deck that can just deal 10 damage out of hand, probably not the smartest of ideas.
Right. I'm now noticing that she does run 3 Blood Moons in this list, so I see a lot of potential power coming out of these Righteous Devils in future games as well.
Did you like it?
Ooh. Still no activator. She might actually, on a very specific turn, that she can maybe play Mask of Black Death alongside of Belphegor. Not to pop it, but after the Belphegor, and then follow up the next turn with the Righteous Devil. Might be one of her best ways to get into Vengeance right now, because her whole hand revolves around Vengeance at the moment. If she doesn't get there, she might not actually be able to play the game she wants to play.
I'd say it looks like Bad doesn't really have a... going off of what you said, she doesn't really have a threat without this Storm from Ephemera. It's just, it could be so risky to go to Vengeance even with a Mask of Black Death there to protect her, just because a deck like Roach is so easily capable of throwing in excess damage that 10 plus the negation of 5 is still within range, especially with Kionis drawing out a lot of his low-cost card options with the zero-cost like Goblin Mage with another Fina in hand.
It's true. I feel like the only thing I'm thinking right now, if I'm Bad, is like, we're going into turn 6. Roach combo is not really possible on turn 6. Roach combo really opens up on turn 7. So this would be the turn, A, because Belphegor can evolve over this Fina that I'm fighting across. Also, it allows me to play my Mask this turn, the turn right before they go into combo, and then just start spreading my control around with these Righteous Devils on the following turns. Or a mixture of that with Diabolic Drains or Emeralda coming up, that kind of thing. I feel like this is the only turn she actually can do the play. If she wants to.
I think the Wood of Brambles makes it just awkward enough that I would reconsider, though. Just because the Belphegor would normally be able to evolve over it, but just that one tick of damage
that's right.
is enough
That's
to leave it with. That would just be 10 health with a Mask on board. If not for that, though, I think it would be a fantastic play, too. Yeah, I'm changing my mind.
Maybe Belphegor with the Diabolic Drain is also an option, but then you've got to consider how can they deal 12 damage? Is it possible? Realistically, they have 1 0-cost card in their hand, so if they go 0 plus 2 spells plus Roach, that's 3 spells before the Roach, into a 4/5, so that's 9, 10, 11. So actually, there is only 11 damage, not 12 damage available.
Having played versus the Vengeance Blood matchup before, my only experience with the amount of lethal threat Roach tends to have is if a Elven Princess Mage came down on curve, then that's actually able to threaten about 10 damage that early in the game. But with only 1 0 cost, it's just hard to find it.
It's only 1 off lethal. Like, what we're seeing right now is only 1 damage off of lethal in the hand of Kionis right now. And Bad navigating that, I think, to the best of her ability. And then she's got Blood Moon to follow up with Righteous Devil on following turns. So anything Kionis puts into play right here could bite him a little bit.
So Kionis is actually in a really tough spot here. I think one of the biggest impulsive decisions he can make is just to simply go for another Goblin Mage, use up this last evolution point for that setup. But sometimes not having that evolution point for damage against a deck with tools like Mask of the Black Death could end up being a mistake.
I think if I'm Kionis, my play here is Roach, go face, hit down to 11, and then bounce it with an Airbound Barrage or a Nature's Guidance to put Bad right out of Vengeance range, and to get that 1 point of chip damage that I need. However, decides to put Bad into Vengeance, but not leaving any followers in play. That's super important. We've talked about this at length before. If Blood doesn't have followers to gain health off of, it's at a much bigger disadvantage.
The second evolution point for Bad here, assuming Vengeance is up, is more or less, even just removing a body from force is not that important. Control Blood has no difficulties doing that. It's being able to heal 4 off of it is what I think is the most important utility it might have. So Ionis at the very least was forced bad to play Mask of the Black Death no matter what. Now how Ionis navigates around this.
Yeah, I think this is just honestly a waiting game now. I think Ionis is now at a huge advantage and realistically can just do things like Dance of Death to knock some tokens off. And like I said, you have extra followers, or I'm sorry, extra bounce spells in the hand to actually poke a little bit with Roach. So actually you could dance this turn, Roach poke next turn, and then just set up lethal the following turn. Like, Ionis never really has to do anything this game other than just wait out Bad's Amulet.
And also knowing with open decklist that Bad only plays 2 masks, I think right now what Ionis is thinking of is just weighing the probability that Bad would have another one if he went too far here to try to pop it and deal any extra damage. But lots of ways to approach this safely.
Yeah, you can even Elf Twin into Roach into bounce. That will deal the same amount of damage that Dance will deal and will not remove the Righteous Devil. So I actually think Dance of Death is the only play here. You get rid of the drain, you knock it down by 3, including the beginning of Bad's turn. Yep, and that's what Ionis is doing, it looks like.
Right. Doesn't commit the Roach or any more tools. I actually never knew how to describe this before, when I would just get this 6th sense that someone's done with their turn, and I realize what it is now. The thinking icon at the top right goes away.
Yes. So now we get to see the situation that Bad's put in, right? Like, doesn't have a lot of options. Scarlet Savoir's going to be good, but over the course of the next few turns, Roach just ramps up in damage. So that 11 damage we were talking about, we're surpassed that now. Ionis is well upwards of a lethal setup here and might actually be able to push lethal this turn, even through the Mask of Black Death.
Right.
So let's see. We'll have access to a 3 Roach combo for 7 play points and has the Airbound Barrage as an extra card to cast here. So if you go Goblin Mage into Roach, attack.
That clears the
bounce. That clears the mask, and then you can bounce it, and then that gives you 5 play points left, so that you can play a Nature's Guidance and 2 more Roaches. Yeah, that's lethal. That's definitely lethal.
Animated one too. I've always been impressed by that.
So
right. I think there is some flexibility in order.
Yeah, flexibility, absolutely. The Roaches are going to get monstrous this turn. Yeah, this attacks, and then Airbound Barrage into double Roach with an Evolution Orb.
5/6.
Ionis just doing the hard math, like, wait a minute, I made my plays. I'm going to have to commit this turn, but do I have it?
It's always a pretty or a very tense situation when pulling these off, because you can glance at a Roach hand and be like, yeah, I probably have lethal, but when actually executing it, even just making one mistake could leave you 1 point off of it.
Oh,
especially
it happened
when
to me
take it a lot of
when I played Roach a lot, even when you're streamlined with the deck, like everything's going right, all of a sudden you're just like, I'm gonna do it this order this time, and then you just play the wrong, card first, and then you're just like, wait a minute. Did we run out of time with an attack?
Hi there.
I think so.
Ionis again, no! No!
How does... Okay, I wasn't thinking about what would happen in case Ionis didn't attack with one of the Roaches. Can he recover from that? He still has a Goblin Mage and a 3rd Roach. Needs to do 5 damage. Bad now heals off of his Roaches.
I don't think so.
11 damage Roach?
I mean, it's possible if you have Bounce in hand, but Ionis does not have Bounce in hand. And Bad feels it. Right?
Oh, that's the Roach.
Bad just taking a sip of her drink. She's like, you know what? If you're gonna give it to me, I'm gonna take it. These are for real stakes. And if you, yeah, it's right. And if you can't figure out your optimal line of play before that timer goes off, that's built into the game. And we see it catching up to Ionis now, twice now, actually.
Right. I mean, I really like Ionis' decks. I think they're very interesting. It's very difficult to navigate them sometimes, especially when you add a bit of depth to Roach with cards like Elf Twin Assault and Into the Looking Glass. But this is pretty tragic to watch go down regardless. Lots of tough decisions to make, and just running out of time.
I find it to be super interesting too, because we saw this exact same thing happen to Bad last week. Bad actually ran out of time several times last week, just making really hard decisions over long turns. And now her opponent doing it against her. It's, I don't know, maybe call it karma. You know, maybe karma really wants to give her that extra time back, and this is how it's manifesting itself.
Right. You see Konis trying to think of any possible way to make it happen this turn, but I think just the lack of a bounce takes away any credits to this Roach being able to finish her off this turn.
Yep, and Konis just packs it in. So Bad will move on.
Oh
well, I say
my-
move on, but get an extra point there.
Oh my god. What a way to... I mean, the damage was there, right? It was literally
there. It was-
on board.
in play.
That has to be absolutely devastating. Absolutely devastating. I can't... Your deck was geared to be controlled. You had the win. And it was right there, but you just could not click and drag in time.
If you're Kionis' friend right now, give him a hug, please. 'Cause
Yeah.
we can't, and we want to.
Hey, if you're Kionis right now, understand that it wasn't your lineup. It wasn't any... You know, you had the game won. You saw the lines. And it's totally possible for you to just get it done next week, right? It's a
That's
smaller error to fix than trying to figure out how to deck build properly.
Play more games this week than you think you should, just so that you can get your automatic responses down with your turns.
Now, something that's interesting is Sheepy, in when he was a guest on the show, was talking about how he thinks players play too fast. You know, he was talking about take your time, make your decisions. Please don't rope. Please don't.
well, here's the thing. With the type of decks Sheepy plays are control decks, where realistically the decisions you make are important, but the amount of decisions you're making in a turn don't cause you to rope, right? It's like, I'm going to play this follower, this removal spell, I'm going to Evo, and then I'm going to attack. When you're playing Roach, it's I have to play a spell, followed by 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 a spell.
And
then
they
I have
all
to
have
attack,
pretty
I have to
significant
Evo.
animations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you have to take that into account.
Yeah. So, wow. Bad will end up taking the win here. And Kionis drops down 0-1. Not for any necessarily, you know, poor strategy. But, I mean, who knows? If he had won that game, he would have to go to a second game.
It could be a strategy. So, Kionis, you have to identify within yourself. Next week, if you want to bring a combo lineup, if you think it's the best for against your opponent, you need to understand if you can actually not rope with those decks. Because if you feel like you can't in tense situations, find a different strategy.
Well, we'll see what Kionis does. But I believe we have an interview lined up with Bad, the one and only. Bad, can you hear me right now?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
All right, my first question is, oh, wow, I can hear myself. Oh my gosh.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. My first question, actually, is how do I pronounce your name? Is it Bade? Is it Bad? Is it just Bad?
No, it's just bad.
It's
Bad
just
with
Bad.
bad with an extra A, because, you know, puns are funny, sheep are cute, and I suck ass. So.
Well, I don't know about that. You came really close to qualifying for the World Grand Prix. You just took a pretty big win. You're pretty adamant about playing particular style of deck of playing control. How would you describe yourself as a player? Well, I guess here, let's start from the start. How did you even get into Shadowverse? How did you get into tournaments? How did you start playing competitively?
Oh gosh. Well, I used to play a lot of Hearthstone, but like I'm mainly both in Hearthstone and Shadowverse an arena player. And to be honest, the only reason I decided to, I enter the qualifier, it was kind of just a YOLO moment. Like, oh, I have nothing to do this fucking weekend. I really like playing Control Blood lately. Why not? Let's just enter it and see how it does. So I don't have any experience before all of this, and
Mm-hmm.
like I've been really kind of burning the midnight oil trying to get up to par in terms of constructed, because arena is like really where all my focus has been up until now.
Sure.
But
Arena is a very different game, but you've been doing really well, and I feel like you came in at a really good time when everybody was trying to play control, and it was kind of the more effective deck to run. After today, I mean, you just kind of cruise along, and Kionis nearly delivered the lethal blow, but ended up ending his turn through timeout. How do you feel in terms of kind of the round robin is very dangerous for players who play a particular style and are characteristic for it? Are you developing kind of a wider variety of strategies? Kind of what is, are there people that you can look to kind of find out new decks and archetypes to play?
yeah, I've been in contact with like all the kind of teams and Discord, been chatting to people and whatnot, and I knew like there was a risk, that someone was going to bring triple combo this week, because all I've ever brought before has been control, control, control. But I was really busy this week, and I just figured, okay, it's better if for me to bring decks I know how to play than to bring triple aggro and then just risk it without really knowing how to play and build it properly or as much as I would like to. So I just decided to go with, for me, the safe option. And if it came down to triple combo, it came down to it. I just have to take what I could.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, it kind of worked for you this week for sure, and hopefully it'll work for you in the weeks to come. Is there anybody out there who kind of supports you, like any friends you have or family that kind of is excited with you about kind of the things that you're doing and kind of the success really that you've been having so far in the Shadowverse competitive scene?
Well, my little brother's been having some fun watching me play anyway, and it's kind of really weird to see me actually on the videos. But yeah, he would be the main one, and the folks at this and all, and Shadius and all have been giving me scrims and whatnot, so they're all pretty helpful and supportive too.
Great. Well, glad to see you kind of entering into the competitive scene and doing so well. My heart out to you for kind of barely not making the cut for the Contenders Cup. Are there any shout-outs or anybody you want to give kind of a acknowledgement towards before we kind of move on with the tournament here?
Shadius from Crimson Fencers, hi. And all the people from Team Disaster, I guess. You're all cool weeps.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much. Hope to see kind of more of your gameplay and see you developing into a more varied player, if that so is your calling, or to just kick butt on control. But thanks for taking the time for a little bit of a chat. But we're going to continue with the tournament now. So there it is. I mean, she's kind of a control player through and through, played a lot of arena, and just tried her hand in competitive. And I really feel like it was probably the perfect time to enter into the scene if you were a control player, right?
Oh yeah, literally the perfect time, and is showing that she knows what to do with the control decks. Of course, I think she skated by a little bit this week, but that's not to say it's on her by any means. Realistically, the only note I'd have for her is now that you know what can happen in round robin, such as somebody countering your entire lineup, be aware. Just be aware of it.
And interestingly enough, that was something that she pointed out, right? She said, oh, I suspected that somebody would bring triple combo against me. Lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. So, I mean, the instincts are there. Not necessarily a hard read to make, but the awareness is very important, right? So we'll see if that can be a change for bad in the future. But for now, if you want to follow broadcast schedules and kind of information on the tournament and also interesting articles about competitive Shadowverse and whatnot, shadowverse.ng.io is your website to go to for all that kind of information and a little kind of fun stuff on the side. So definitely go and check out the website for all that kind of information. But we are halfway through the broadcast, so we're going to take a little bit of a breather after that. It feels like our turn is roping out right now, so we're going to come back in 5 and get a little more refreshed. And after the break, right after those 5 minutes, we're going to talk a little bit about the exciting announcements for what's coming up next for Shadowverse. So some very cool stuff happening. We're going to get to discuss it a little bit, talk about it a little bit, so don't go anywhere. We will be right back. very special segment. This just in. No, it's not just in. Actually, the news is kind of old. It's
Rainy, tell them about Shadowverse Next. Just do it.
just do it. All right, Shadowverse Next was a very cool thing that was announced at 3 a.m. I think November 1st, around there. A big announcement for some of the upcoming changes for the games, and perhaps what is the biggest addition or expansion to the game so far. And we're just going to go through and take a look at all the big kind of items that were talked about and announced and mentioned during this whole thing. Starting with, there's a new format that the game can be played in, right? And it's something that the community has been asking for a very long time, and have been wondering about. That's going to be rotation. So they were talking about how there were going to be new ways to play the game. Rotation is one of them, and what they're going to be doing is eliminating a bunch of cards from the pool of possibilities and saying, okay, you can only play cards from the last 5 expansions, from the 5 latest card sets. And then there are certain basic cards that will remain, right? So those won't be necessarily taken out if they're not within that scope. But there are going to be around 500 cards that you can play with. And they were talking about how this was to incentivize new players to kind of jump in and not feel like they've had to build up this incredible library of cards to kind of keep up, as well as kind of make sure that the gameplay is dynamic and changing with every new expansion in kind of a significant way. So that's rotation, and then of course they still have unlimited, which is kind of the standard format. So that option is there for people who want to play with all the legacy cards and all that kind of stuff. But very exciting. A lot of people wanted rotation, and a lot of the community was talking about and speculating that this was coming down the pipeline. So cool that we're going to get that. Additionally, another thing that they were talking about is a tournament format, a tournament mode. The way they described it, now they gave not too many details about this, but the tournament event for Arena. So I'm going to assume it's maybe something kind of like Take-Two. Not really sure. They didn't really vocalize those points at all. But the big points that they talked about is anybody can join, and you can play at your own pace. So the timing is something that you can choose to continue or stop or play a game. They specifically talked about people who are playing on commutes and stuff like that. And there's cool prizes that you can win. You know, things that are a little more unique, things that are a little more tangible, perhaps. So, a very cool addition, kind of, and providing players new ways to compete and get into that kind of particular scene. And maybe, who knows, maybe it would be really cool if they had some kind of deck format in there as well, right? Where it kind of is constructed decks, and maybe it is kind of a best of 3 thing, right? No clue, but we'll be able to find out more about that. Very cool for competitive players like us. Well, not me. I'm not competitive. I'm just bad. But and finally, the last announcement, probably the most exciting one and the one that people are looking forward to the most, a new playable craft. A new playable craft. They announced Portal Craft. Yuan is the name, and Yuan is probably what people want to see when they play this guy. Walker of Dimensions, the Vindictive Contender is kind of the flavor text here. But they were able to tease a little bit of his mechanics, and there's new kind of keywords here that are associated with this particular individual. And we didn't get to see too much of how that would play out, but they did tease us the mechanic. So, let's talk about it, and maybe let's start with the most exciting thing. Mofu, thoughts on Portal Craft? What are the things that you are excited about? What are the things that you are curious about?
I think that his mechanic is simply the most interesting mechanic a class has ever had in Shadowverse thus far. For those who didn't catch it, it's called Resonate. It is, some cards have effects that activate if there's an even number of cards in your deck. I think that this could both mean that there's an advantage to it and that you want that to happen, or there might be cards that do completely different things. I think it's a very, very cool mechanic for decision making. It has a lot of space, and I'm really excited to see where they go with it.
And to be clear, Resonance, as I recall, was if you have an even number of cards in your deck, then it is on. It is considered on.
Active. Yeah.
Active. And then if you have an odd number of cards in your deck, it is not active. So, pretty interesting. I mean, card draw is going to be very significant for this class,
Deck
I would assume.
search.
Yeah.
A whole lot of different things.
Yeah. So, any final thoughts, Exo, about any of the things that you saw there? Anything that particularly excites you?
Rotation, baby. I can't wait to see more dynamic decks being built for competitive play. So something very important to keep note of for you competitive players out there. They said that unlimited tournaments will still be happening in competitive play. So don't think that you can just shrug off all the old sets and you're never going to have to play them again. Rotation is happening, but unlimited is sticking around. So you're going to have to be good at both over time. But rotation basically just opens up so much more new design space for people to be building decks, a lot more fluid tournaments with things that aren't going to be, you know, what you expect every single week. So I love it. I love rotation.
Rotation certainly going to bring a lot of diversity to what we see, and hopefully we'll get to see a lot of new representation for certain crafts, or a new identity for certain crafts that have had an identity for a long time. But let's get back to the tournament. Of course, there's some very important games to play right now. We still have Group B to go through. Let's take a look at the standings and see where everybody stands here. Group A has played their half for the day. Fatina, Essia, and Bad get away with a 1-0 scoreline. Kiona's Pain and Best Marmot are served up the 0-1 scoreline themselves, but there's still many games to play, and they can definitely come back from this. 5 games in total in the round robin, and we've only played 1 of them. So we are going to be moving over to Group B. That's going to be Meow, Dasvi, Sheepy, Mad Allen, Suzoni, and Akamaru Red, with the first match being Dasvi versus Meow. So what do you guys think about this particular lineup here? Both of them are newer players, and Meow has kind of, you know, talked a little bit about kind of how he kind of approaches the game and kind of what his interests are, and is a very kind of is somebody who has fun with it, right? You know, he's not necessarily like an Akamaru Red in the sense of getting really competitive and really into the weeds about kind of preparing for particular decks, but he might be developing into that kind of player. Some of these decks here: Havencraft, Runecraft, Swordcraft, Runecraft. This is the first time I feel like we're really going to see Rune in a formalized way. Am I wrong? I feel like we haven't seen Rune today, but there were a lot of Rune decks submitted.
Yeah, so Rune just is really scary right now. I mean, D-Shift is super scary if you don't have a super aggressive deck against it. Dirt Rune is very scary because it's just a very consistent deck that deals damage over time versus a slower mid-range deck. I mean, Rune's all over the place, especially today, especially in Group B. We're about to take off everything you thought you knew about Runecraft in a competitive environment, and we're going to go down the list to a lot of different things these players brought today.
Now let's take a look at specifically Meow's Havencraft deck, because I feel like this is specifically designed to take Rune and give it the German suplex, the half Boston crab, you know, stand on the ropes and then jump down and elbow drop it, right? But the title card that I want to look at is Taurus the Great. I believe that is his title, Taurus the Great. How egotistical of him. How do you just call yourself the Great, right? Tell me about this card, Bofu. New card in the list, and where it kind of fits into Havencraft here.
So he's the killer of evildoers with one of the best voice lines in the game. I absolutely love Taurus the Great. I think he's one of the coolest additions to Haven yet. Because Haven, for the past long while, hasn't really had... I play this from my hand and it finishes the game right now. They've usually had long-lasting linked editions, like Aegis or Seraph, for example. But for a list like his, which is very aggressive, Taurus is just a one-drop, or, well, you drop it once, not a one-cost faller. You drop it, it finishes the game, he just smacks your opponent up. And if he fails to do that, he can just deal all of it to a follower and he strikes them twice. So I think it's very versatile. It fits the role it needs to fill and doesn't want to get any flashier than that. I think it's an awesome card, and I'm really excited to see it.
So talk to me about the list in whole. Taurus the Great, obviously the one-drop end game thing where, you know, Meow is thinking, I'm just going to get this right at the end, and that's all it's going to do. What about all the cards that surround it, Exo? Talk to me about this list.
So Meow's even going harder than we saw last week on the I want to protect my followers against spells game plan. Specifically, I want to imagine for Runecraft, but also just making it hard for most decks to deal with the followers that he's playing. Amulets you can't deal with immediately. Minus and White Tigers you can't deal with spells. You have to trade into them. He's also got Mist Shamans in there to kind of give more of those effects to followers outside of that. And then, of course, he's got the regular suite of, I want to deal damage to your face, I've got Garuda, I've got Dark John, and then I've got Taurus to finish the game off. So This is a super aggressive list, just trying to aim to get around all spells that the opponents are playing.
And I think it's very important to bring a list like this, and I feel like Meow has put some kind of careful deliberation into why he's going to bring a list like this, and I really like that. Right? It's not necessarily that he said, "Oh, Dimension Shift is a possibility. I'm just going to go straight kind of Blood Sword aggro," right? Which, fair enough. A lot of players have made that decision, and I think rightfully so. But he says, let's try to see if we can be a little more creative here. Let's try to use the options that are available to me within this craft and see if that plays out really well. And I know a lot of the frustrations, for RuneCraft players are when that menu comes down, right? And then when another one comes down, and when it's the White Tiger, you're like, I can't do anything.
That's right. Okay, so let's kick off into this game real quick, Mofu. Before we start, I kind of want to go over what Meow is playing in his rune deck. So he's playing what you would think is D-Shift, but he's also playing Blade Mages, and he's playing Enchanted Swords. So he's doing the whole, like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago, something like that. I don't even know how many months ago it was, but back to Blade Mage and Enchanted Sword as his win condition with Daria to kind of speed it up even more.
Well, I think you pretty much have summarized my experience with this kind of thing, in that it was tried a long time ago, the Daria into shift. Well, it's the other way around. If I remember correctly, the plan was to try to shift and then play the Daria, slam as much as you can, and you just kind of hope that the hand that you ended up developing is good enough for the shift. It can be explosive.
You hope to get like a D-Shift reduced in cost by the Daria so that you can pull it off soon, or it just gives you another option to go off faster than D-Shift against an aggro deck so that you can just do something as opposed to just sitting there and dying.
Right. I think that what makes the list really, really interesting is that it takes the idea of D-Shift and transforms it a little bit into less of a, this is going to be the win condition I develop all game long, and turns it into something of a, I'm going to try to make use of this card throughout the gameplay of my deck. Get it off where I can, and if I don't, then I still have other ways to win the game. And you don't really see that come out of Rune very often, especially with this card.
That's right. And I think it's this more than any other deck, I will say, and this is from experience playing every form of D-Shift, Rune, you name it. This is the hardest list to pilot by far. You are literally putting so many interactions and cards that do things that are counterintuitive together in the same deck that your turns get really hard, and you really have to know what your game plan is going into every single turn in order to execute properly.
I remember actually, there was a Japanese player who had piloted something similar to this, to the Top of Ladder, which originally popularized it a long time ago, and even then it was described as the most difficult to pilot rune deck ever made.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree. Yeah.
Right. Usually a lot of, maybe not just Rune, but a lot of synergistic lists in this game in general tend to try to combine all the benefits of their game plan together at once. But I think the fact that Daria can throw away a D-Shift that you've been working on all game, which means you have, but it doesn't necessarily do so because you can get the Daria to be a part of it, it means that this is a list that has a lot of decision making that isn't just a matter of what order you play cards in, but what lines of play you completely sacrifice in order to develop other ones.
Right. And here we get to see an interesting hand, right? So, like, these are things that I'm thinking about if I'm Meow. I already have 2 Blade Mages in my hand, so playing my Daria outright is probably not the best idea. However, I'm already at 12. I don't have removal in my hand. How am I going to deal with this board if I just don't sacrifice this D-Shift plan and just go in as soon as I possibly can? So this is a tough game for Meow to navigate here without having removal in hand.
Right. Usually you'll see a standard D-Shift list find ways to navigate around mid-range pressure early on, but with so many different pieces that Meow can use as combos in the same hand, while it's nice to be able to develop all of it, I think he's starting to lose a little bit from how quickly he can respond to all of Dazvi's threats.
Right, and this Ceres is looming. The Ceres is either going to have to eat all of this evolution plus an angelic snipe, or it's just going to sit there and be a nuisance for Meow every single turn. It also negates the extra damage that you get from Magic Missile and Angelic Snipe. Like, usually you can get a few pings off before you go crazy with combos, but Ceres just negates all of that. And you can see Meow even realizing that just now with a shake on his head.
Evolves the Guardian Golem. I think something that actually surprises me about this is usually I think Ceres is not the most useful card against lists like a combo deck like D-Shift. But here, we see just denying the amount of tempo recovery that Meow can make with Guardian Golems and things of the like just makes her such an active and potent threat.
At least this time he gets to keep 3 toughness on his follower so that Ceres just doesn't eat it for free. Oh, never mind. Never mind. And now Das V, I mean, realistically, all he has to do is resource starve Meow. One of the things against D-Shift that is very potent is if you see them get to fairly no cards in hand, you can realistically think to yourself, how are they really going to beat me? However, Meow has the option of Daria that most of these decks don't. So this is an interesting situation.
It may just be like you said before, even though he's made 7 spell boosts of progress on this D-Shift, this might just not be the hand for him. This might not contain what he needs. Whether he goes into this area is a big deal. Now drawing another one is pretty unfortunate.
Yeah. He might just have, like, you got to think though, right? Like, you can't really sacrifice anymore because we're going into Ektart turns. Of course, we know Das V doesn't have it, but Meow doesn't know that, so he's got to count this damage every single turn to know if he's dead or not.
Right. Opts into a magic owl, or at least he just wanted the body from it. They can give him up to 7 spell boosts on this upcoming hand, which has an enchanted blade as its only hit. Well, if he wants to, he can put the blade on the owl, and it can just wield its way into Ceres here.
That's true. That gives it the full 7 spell boost.
While perfectly fancy, I think a lot of the power that comes out of a play like that, to begin with, would be being able to get the spell boosts on more things. But this hand that Meow's drawn into just doesn't look like it's going to benefit much from that last owl.
Right. That being said, does have a threat that's bigger than something that Das V can deal with, and having 2 kaleidoscopic glows in hand means he can kind of take the board back. But then again, won't really have an end game strategy. Here's one interesting thing to note, Mofu, and I started realizing this actually today playing D-Shift. I played a bunch of D-Shift this morning just so I can keep current with it and that kind of thing. I won 2 games this morning without even having D-Shift in my hand, purely off of the back of Golem Assault and Chimeras, just playing out tempo turns. Like, you try to basically get to turn 6, build up a state to where you have maybe a Fiery Embrace, or you've dealt with the board the turn before. You pop all 3 golems with a Commence Experiment Sigil, and then you play them all behind a Chimera or 2, and then you just say, you know, here's what I have. Can you do anything about it? And more often than not, people just fold to it. So there is still ways for Meow to win this, because he has the card in his hand. You know, he has those options.
It's really funny that you say that, because when Golem Assault was released, my very first idea was that D-Shift didn't need another win condition. I actually think that Golem Assault, in a lot of situations, is its own win condition, but
yes.
He didn't have the time right there to pop it for its full value, and I think the games you mostly win off of it are going to be games against a player who has smaller bodies that aren't really capable of trading into all of them at once, and they just fold to that triple Guardian turn. But I think it's just so hard for Meow to find that here.
Yeah, especially without having access to the cards that we were talking about, like Fiery Embrace or things like that, to deal with the big followers along with the tempo play, or Chimeras. He's not playing those as well. So no real way to deal with these 4/5s. And realistically, I mean, he's kind of already gone through, you know, D-Shifts, Darias, without really doing a whole lot with them, unfortunately.
That's the end of that. A really interesting observation that I've made while watching this deck is, as interesting and non-linear as it seems, I think one of its weaknesses, which is rare for a combo deck or a deck that runs a lot of combo win conditions, is I think it actually has a disadvantage versus mid-range. I think it doesn't pressure mid-range enough with a threat of just stomping them out of the game with a combo. And it doesn't really put on enough pressure to force mid-range to use many of its tools early on, that I think that was just simply one of the worst matchups for it, with the limited knowledge I have of the list.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree. When you play less overall removal in your deck, especially ones that you can play a lot faster, you're essentially saying to your opponent, I actually can win faster. So maybe Meow knows his combo deck well enough to know that in optimal situations, which that last game probably wasn't, I'm going to win this game a lot faster than normal D-Shift can, or at least I can Daria win or do something a little bit faster than normal D-Shift can. But, like you said, with so many different combo pieces in deck, it can be hard to assemble the right way.
Now, it's really interesting off that line of thought that now he's going to be piloting it versus Dosby's D-Shift list, which is more reminiscent of the more familiar lists that we've seen of D-Shift. It makes space for one of the giant chimeras and a Flame Destroyer, just packs the win conditions along with D-Shifts that it wants to develop early. So here we'll have to see what Meow's game plan is if he actually runs into a standard D-Shift list.
That's right. Now, one thing to note is that the chimeras really won't come into play until like the very end game, most likely. And it's realistically just going to be about who can actually power down their D-Shifts fast enough, and if you can you actually present a lethal board state with it?
I think even
that probably sums up what D-Shift always does, but in this matchup, it's just who does it first, is realistically all I was saying.
I think that one of the weaknesses of Meow's list in a matchup like this is usually the window where you can deal a lot of damage to D-Shift is extremely early in the game, within the very first few turns, because Magic Missile and Kaleidoscopic Blow aren't perfect answers to a lot of board states. But Meow doesn't really, or maybe even just Runecraft as a class, doesn't really have that many options that can put pressure around that time. So where Meow begins to try to find pieces of pressure, are times when Dosby is going to be able to quite easily deal with it all, and in the meantime, he has a lot of time to spell boost his D-Shifts.
Yep, and I find it interesting. He decides to play the Golem here. Normally, again, you want to save cards in your hand so that you don't allow your opponent to be able to spell boost more off of you.
I think the reasoning for the Golem was he wanted to clear up some hand space in case he goes for a Merlin this turn.
Yep, and gets an owl too. And he's already got 2 D-Shifts in hand. Unfortunately, he's just got a bunch of followers in hand as well.
Isn't a very clean turn for a Merlin. If he evolved it, then he would be putting himself up to 9 cards in hand, risking 1 mil off the top.
Yeah, I think risking the mill isn't really that bad at the moment. Decides not to Evo. That's a perfectly fine play. But the milling of cards at the moment, I think he's got pretty much everything he needs, other than the fact that he just needs to spell boost a whole bunch. So yeah, maybe just opting to get a smaller cost card off the top is probably what he's thinking.
And he sees 2 more Evo targets in his hand between the other Merlin and the Magic Owl. And I think saving the last one could be important in a matchup like this. If only just to push a little more damage when he has the combo later.
My time has come.
And as you can see with Dosby playing his followers, Meow just able to spell boost quite a bit more than him on these early turns.
We're looking at a 6 cost D-Shift to compare to 11 here. Summon Golems and 2 Blade Mage.
Yeah, let's think about lethal setup. So these one Golem costs 1, the other one costs 2. And Blade Mages we're just gonna say effectively cost 0, right? By the time you play them. So this would be 4, 7, 10 with an Evo 12. Yeah, he's well over lethal if he can D-Shift twice, but he only has 1 D-Shift. So he's going to have to try to mount a full offensive in a single turn with a D-Shift in order to do this with the Blade Mages. So it's definitely possible because Blade Mages have Storm. That's the whole reason we play them.
I think if he can find and start working on an Enchanted Sword soon with maybe just 1 more piece of damage, which is pretty easy to find in the meantime, he might be able to land it with just 1 D-Shift. But he's on a clock here, as Dosby already more or less has most of what he needs. I think actually Dosby could be missing a bit damage on his side as well. Not that it would be too difficult to find that with his second D-Shift.
This could be it. If Meow's going with the Blade Mage, I feel like he's found his endgame. And this is turn 7. And then into another Blade Mage, so this will be 6 this turn, and then well over lethal on the follow-up attack, I believe, right? So 6 plus 6, 12, plus 6, 18. Yeah, exactly lethal, actually. With another Evo, even 20 damage. Yeah, so that's pretty cool to see that card poof.
Yeah.
Magic Owl disappearing.
It's actually pretty rare you see cards poof from being bounced often, or like that at all. But what an interesting list. I wasn't actually expecting to see Meow ever pull off a really early D-shift with a list that has so many more things going on behind it.
Yeah, this was just perfect turn 7 D-shift. It doesn't get any better than that. I guess
In turn
technically,
7
if you
shift.
go the full Enchanted Sword Blade Mage combo, you can technically possibly go off on turn, I think it was like 4 or 5, something like that.
Yeah.
It's like it's possible, but you have to get extremely lucky.
The top 20 cards of your deck have to be in exact order, I think.
Yeah, not likely. But yeah, Meow
You can see Meow's
showing us
pretty
how
happy
it's done.
about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy if I just turned 7 D-shifted in the mirror. Absolutely.
And as we mentioned, with how his list seems to be pretty teched up against Rune here, I think he's in a really good position in this matchup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, goes for the full maul. Oh my goodness. Gets 2 minions right off the bat. And is on the play. This is about perfect situation against D-shift here.
Mm-hmm. Of all of the followers to possess an untargeted ability, sort of effect, I think Main Yu is one of the easiest ones to deal with just because it can be threatened by other 2-drops, like Conjure Golem or the like. But seeing Dasby's hand being quite slow, he has 1 Conjure Golem to be able to deal with this, which may just end up being scriptured. I think this is at least a promise of a lot of early game damage on the side of Meow.
Right. And I think the scripture will happen. I mean, realistically, you could just play the other Minyu. But I think saving all of those types of effect cards in your hand is just worth it. I think you just do it.
Absolutely. Pretty decent start. He has a setup for a lot of damage between Divine Birdsong and Garuda as well. So he has a fine transition here, but I think he needs more than all of this to be able to finish Dasby off. Whereas Dasby, I think, is going to be looking for his own win conditions, finds his first D-shift.
So he's got a perfect hand, too. He's got Fate's Hand, he's got another Sort Cache, he's got a Fiery Embrace, he's got Wind Blast, he has a Merlin if he ever needs it. I doubt this will be the type of game he needs it in, but might need to use it as a removal spell.
Mm-hmm.
So I think both decks doing exactly what they need to be doing.
I think in that scenario, then the most important part of the matchup just kind of grinds down to whether or not Meow's strategy is going for here is going to be able to put enough damage off. While I see a lot of tools, I think I'm pretty afraid of Dasby's position here. Meow doesn't.
Oh yeah.
One can just kind of assume after a certain point that with a gigantic hand, Rune's probably found their win conditions and are working on them. And at that point, if you're not able to throw a convincing enough amount of damage face every turn, you see this very aggressive Tin Soldier usage, then that's just going to be it.
What's interesting to note against D-shift players, if they max out, especially when it's one that they could control, like Merlin, you know they have D-shift, okay? Just be thinking in your mind, okay, they have to have D-shift now, otherwise they wouldn't have put themselves into the situation, most likely. So now it's just, and as you saw it, Meow's like, you know what, I don't even care about this Tin Soldier staying in play, I need it to deal the guaranteed damage.
Right. Was able to transition 1 evolution point into 3 damage there. Very popular usage of Tin Soldier, I think. But if we count the amount of damage that Meow has over the next few turns, he has another tick of 3, another tick of 5 from Storm, and then he just needs to be able to resolve something like an Aria or Opinion Prayer, and I think that's the last 2.
Yep, and he needs to be able to pop them, because we're getting... And as we know, D-shift goes off a little bit faster now. Now, there hasn't been an owl drawn for Dasvi yet, so I'm assuming the earliest he can go off is turn 8. But with that Chimera, I guess turn 8 would be it, right? You just try to D-shift, you go hard, and then you play that Chimera on 9, because he doesn't really have any other way to win the game at the moment. This is only his follow. It's the only follower in his hand at the moment. And this is a scary board.
Just absolutely commits for the followers that he knows Dasby is going to have to really bend over backwards to try to solve here.
And I think Meow just thinking, do I want to save the Evolution Orb for the leftover follower next turn, or do I just want to push now? I think with the ward, it's probably worth pushing now. But I could see it going either way. You don't need to do that this turn.
Right. I think another thing that supports evolving for face damage here is that the main card I'd say Rune has that can deal with situations like this would be Chimera, and that you can just simply aim it at the one follower that doesn't have this effect, and then just evolve it over anything, any small body like White Tiger or Manu. But putting that up to 6 is quite brutal in the case of a Chimera or the like.
That's right. So let's see if I can see the D shifts here. We've got them at 12 even apiece. So definitely still a ways away from that. Has Wind Blast to deal with the 5/6, but doesn't really have a great answer to these two anti-rune followers as we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Not even any followers in hand. And of course we know that Kaleidoscopic Glow Bounce isn't going to matter because of Garuda.
Mm-hmm. Did his best to stave off damage there, but
Yeah,
I
just can't deal with
working
these
out better than-
followers. Yeah, I actually thought Meow was in a pretty poor position, but then he showed just, pushing all these into play at the same turn. Deal with it, can't. And Meow getting a victory here.
Takes it, will move 1-0 into the group, and is able to defeat Dasvi with both his decks. Now, what's really interesting is Meow actually talked to me a little bit about his Runecraft deck, and it includes the whole array of the Daria Blade, and then he also throws in the Dimension Shift in there, which is insane to me. I never really considered that. It's kind of like when we saw that Havencraft deck, where they just like, all right, you're gonna have Garuda, you're gonna have Aegis, you're gonna have,
Yeah,
they
it's
just
the
started,
kitchen sink.
yeah, the win condition deck is what it's called. So maybe that's the newest version of Rune. That's the hot topic here. But there it is. Let's take a look at the standings. And the first match of Group B out of the way. Meow will take the first win here, continuing to demonstrate why he is one of the World Grand Prix contenders on the European side. Very well played by him, and Dasvi will go down 0-1. And that's going to mean that the rest of the group will have to decide who's going to join Meow's half of the bracket, or group, and who's going to join Dasvi's half. We have Sheepy versus Akamaru Red coming up, and then after that we have Mad Allen versus Suzoni, which is going to be interesting matches. Sheepy versus Akamaru Red is probably two of the most careful players here. There are two players. Oh my, damn! Look at this guy. He's got some fashion. Oh my god.
Right.
So Akamaru Red and Sheepy probably the most kind of careful players here. They consider their options very heavily. They weigh out their chances, and they play very consistent decks is a big thing, right? We're going to see people who are playing a game plan that is thought through. It's going to be Runecraft and Shadowcraft, and then Bloodcraft and Runecraft on the side of Sheepy. So those are the players that we have coming up next. What do you guys think about this particular match so far? Any initial thoughts on the deck submissions that they have put through here?
Very choice decks for their specific opponent. These are two players that know that it's the round robin phase, know that they can be countered, and pre-built that into their philosophy. Sheepy is a control player. He brought a triple aggro lineup today, thinking that Akamaru Red might bring combo or something to, offset the control. And then Akamaru Red bringing kind of a mid-rangey anti-aggro deck. So it kind of like out-meted Sheepy's thinking a little bit. I find very interesting.
Whose spies are better than the others?
All right.
It's a battle of information. That's where the war is happening, right? Before they even get here. Let's take a look at Akamaru Red's Bloodcraft deck. Now, Bloodcraft, I think, is becoming the mainstay here, at least for this particular week. A lot of the players are running Bloodcraft decks, and they identify that it's kind of one of the more solid options that you can go to. We've seen it quite a few times in the Control Blood list, in some Vengeance Blood lists, but let's talk about Belphegor as a card. It's one of the older cards here. And Mo, if we talk through Belphegor a little bit, I think for a lot of new players, it's a shiny card, right? They like the idea, oh my god, risk and reward, right? But what are the ways to kind of mitigate against that damage that you take? What are the situations that you don't care about that? How do you effectively use Belphegor as a card?
I think that the main reason why Belphegor's little risk she puts you in of sending you into 10 health as early as turn 4 is actually mostly mitigated because of a single card, which we see him play in 3, Diabolic Drain. I think that card alone allows you to both benefit from the sheer card advantage Belphegor gives you, and also turn that into a tempo swing that doesn't actually set you that low. A lot of decks will struggle to find that much damage to punish you for going into that early on, especially when they lose board to such a huge stat line. And I think we'll see well, I suppose the list has been banned, but we could see in the future, a list like this just shows off how much this card adds to Blood as a class.
And just for clarity, Diabolic Drain there you see it's a 5 play point, it's a spell, does 4 damage, heals for 2. But when you are put into Vengeance, that's 10 health or lower, the cost becomes 1, which is why it's so effective once you put yourself into Vengeance. Very cheap removal, as well as healing. Looking at this list, I mean, it certainly is no Jormungand list, right? But Exo, are there anything? Is there anything of note in your mind here? I noticed that Angelic Knight is becoming something that players are including a lot. What do you think about the list in its entirety?
Well, of course, we see Staircase again as another option for card draw. We don't see Phantom Cats or any other outside things. We don't see the draw 2 in this deck, the Blood Pact at all, where we would normally see it in competitive play just to give players more options, Staircase just being the go-to now. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. You play Belphegor in this list, and you just don't care about your life total if you're playing against anything that's not hyper aggro, because you just put so many stats into play, and you try to kill your opponent before that 10 health deficit even matters.
I'm interested to know why he called it It's Like Blood to Me. Why is that the deck name? It's like
the names
blood
they came up with a lot of their decks, like a lot of them were just like 3 names in a row that just made sense in a sentence. Some of them were like putting out ridiculous names for their decks. I don't know. They're all. I think they're all crazy.
Yeah,
you know,
Belphegor
that's my
says it's like gold to me.
It's like what?
Belphegor says, I want it. It's like gold to me.
Oh.
And so I guess it's playing off
Okay.
You
See,
see,
Mofu
leave
knows.
it to Mofu to know these things. That's
Yeah.
why Mofu is a rare caster, right? That's why he's like the rare pool. When you go
All I
in-
do is roleplay as cards, so, you know.
Oh, I don't have my wallet on me. I was about to show you how to acquire Mofu. You pull out your wallet, you swipe the credit card,
That's right.
put your hands together, you rub them, and you pray. And sometimes
All right.
Mofu will happen.
Gotta point out Sheepy putting up the good luck sign. I like it. Very sportsmanlike of him. And now we get to see the one thing that I think Sheepy was counting on, and that's Akamar Red bringing D-Shift, as this is one of the decks that he brought last week. So I think this is the one matchup that Sheepy is designed to win. And this is a hard matchup for D-Shift. Talk to me about this, Mofu. When you're D-Shift, how do you beat aggro Blood?
I think there's actually only one window for D-Shift nowadays to beat aggro Blood. And even then, it's not really that consistent. I think Chimera and Golem Assault are just these 2 cards that make you able to tempo swing the game back against your opponent, make them slow down just enough for you to get to the turn where D-Shift is active. But if you don't get an ideal situation like that, I think this is just always handed to Blood. Because even behind wards, even behind owning the board against the opponent, Blood just has so much damage that you just can't prevent. A lot of it doesn't come from followers, a lot of it's burn, and Sheepy's list contains all of that.
Yeah, and I think one of the situations that you get put in as D-Shift, regardless of your game plan against Blood, is a lot of times you can stall for that 1 extra turn to then go off the following turn, but it's always a prayer situation. It's always, please don't have that Razory Claw in your hand, or please don't have that 1 extra piece of, you know, anything to just kill me this turn. Just brick this 1 turn, and then I'll win. And I feel like you get into that situation more often than not in this matchup. It almost always feels that way.
Mm-hmm. It also almost always feels like they never actually brick. Like, they could be down to 1 card in hand and it's always Razory Claw. Just for how long Blood can hold all of its damage options, it's so rough for the Rune player every time.
To be fair, this is the matchup where I Golem Assaulted in Chimera without ever drawing a Dimension Shift and actually won the game. I literally just 6 play pointed the Golem Assault, played all 3 of them behind 2 Chimeras, and I said, let's go. And my opponent, I was at 3. Granted, I was at 3. my opponent only had 1 card left in hand and did not have the Razor Claw, so then I ended up winning that game. So it was very, very, yeah, just crazy. You always have to pray. I don't know. I can't see situations where you don't unless you get really lucky.
Yeah. I think I actually assumed this when you said it. I think the main class against which that works the best is Sword, which can put up like a similar amount of pressure to Blood early, but they just lack that damage through wards. But I think Sheepy's list, I'm pretty sure he runs a single copy of Demonic Strike, is the level of burn we're talking about.
Yep.
And only 2 Golem Assaults. I very often seen 3, but only 2 in this list we're watching now. It may just be difficult to find anything to defend himself with.
Yeah, I feel like some players are still opting for Conjure Golem in their deck, and I think it's good. I just don't know if it's good enough to play over more Golem Assaults because of how effective that card can be. It's essentially a second win condition, like you said earlier, in D-Shift, to where you can actually just win the game without a D-Shift, or it makes your D-Shift easier to win with, because then you just go 1, 2, 3 with all 3 of the popped Golems, and then you can D-Shift with that, and that's already 9 damage sitting in play, right? So it's, yeah, I find Golem Assault to be so good in D-Shift right now. Pretty much all the cards I thought were bad in the deck, like Chimera and Golem Assault, I'm just like, you know what, those cards are just great in D-Shift now.
Right. Now, do you think that's because of the card that we see right here, Magic Owl? I feel like this single hat-wearing owl is like the glue that was needed to make cards like Chimera just suddenly work.
Oh yeah, I mean, Magic Owl is insane. Is insanity. So like before, Spectral Wizard was a thing, but you can do the thing that D-Shift likes to do with cards like this, and that's evolve it and then Kaleidoscopic Glow it to get another use out of it, and it gets a full stat line. You know, and it only costs 2 just in general, so you can play a lot more cards around it on the same turn. It's just, this card single-handedly made D-Shift relevant again. I really feel like.
Hearing you describe it actually made me sad for a moment when it really occurred to me that Spectral Wizard evolves into a 3/4 to do the same thing that Owl does. So Owl just...
Clearly the Spectral Wizard did not get the right training in school.
Right.
Yeah,
this is a pretty
either
smart
that or
looking
the
model.
Owls are just way more powerful than the Wizards. That could be the case.
And this always interests me sometimes when like an entire archetype of a class like D-Shift, it just everything changes due to the printing of just this bronze 2-cost follower that I actually had overlooked. I overlooked this card the moment it was revealed. I thought we'd already had a lot of cards like this, or it might not replace Levi, and I'm amazed that it has actually replaced sometimes both Levi and Sorcery Cache.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely insane for a card like Levi to be outvalued in evolution by a new bronze, as you said, 2/2 random follower. Levi's been a staple in D-Shift for, you know, how long now? I don't care if you're running 1 Levi, 2 Levis, 3 Levis, whatever, just to deal with aggro. Like, it's always been this necessary thing. It's a way to get extra damage done to your opponent. You can spell boost with it. You can, I mean, it's so flexible. Just to get simply replaced by a card that does what D-Shift likes to do best, and that's just straight up spell boost.
I'm not doing this for you.
I think this is a really strong development for Sheepy's position here. I think it was just taking a long time on turns that made it feel like that Owl was on board forever.
Right.
But Sheepy has full dominance of the board here. Akamaru, I don't see a very clear way to negate a lot of damage in his hand.
No,
I don't
and
think that he has...
Disagreeable Demon is possibly one of the best anti-D-Shift blood cards because of what we saw that second one do and becoming a 4/3 for 3.
I don't think that Akamaru has a way to deal with it. The Fiery Embrace is out of reach for him, no matter how he spell boosts this turn.
Well, he can. He's got Angelic Snipe hiding away, tucked under the play points over there, and then he's got Magic Owl freshly drawn. So he can utilize both of those to take care of the bigger parts of this board anyway.
I did a quick Spy Kids enhance on the cost of the Fate's Hands there, so he actually can develop a lot this turn that I didn't see at a glance.
It always feels bad when you have to evolve your Owl to get your Fate's Hands playable, as opposed to the other way around, as in just playing your Fate's Hand and then evolving afterwards. But This set him up into a situation where he could deal with so much this turn.
I swallow everything I said. I think that was an insane turn for Akamaru.
Yeah.
That single turn might have won the game, depending on how Sheepy develops the next few cards.
That's right. I mean, he does have a way to deal with this, as well as push more face damage here. I think he should still do the same play that we've talked about before. Use 1 Evo this turn, and have a guaranteed Evo on the Blood Wolf next turn. But I don't know. People don't like my style. That's all right. This is definitely not a bad idea. This definitely opens up for Caraboss and things like that to be drawn.
I think it's a very smart way to guarantee you can transition Evo points into damage all the time. But I think Sheepy right now, what we see from him here is him just saying that he has to go all in, and that if he misses a single point of damage, he's just not confident that he'll be able to draw into much more of it. Because his list is actually close to the ground on cost. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say his close to the ground on cost. He doesn't really have much to convert all of it into other than Caraboss later. Go ahead, sorry.
No, it's okay. The only thing I was going to say about this particular board state is Sheepy could also be on the read. You just use your Fiery Embrace. If you don't have any low cost removal period, like this could just be a turn where you just don't have it, right? Like you don't have a Merlin, you don't have another Owl, you don't have any Wind Blast, and you maybe Kaleidoscopic Glow is your best out, and that's not really a great out here.
Seems that's really the case. Other than the Merlin, he has options, but they're just all not low enough. Blood Wolf is a huge draw here, I think.
This is great. This will basically push Akamura into the point of, okay, Sheepy's now in top deck mode. I have to start putting up defenses if possible, or win immediately because I have no more time left. A single top deck can be game winning for Sheepy at this point.
Even just resolving a Caraboss, even just top decking that one copy of Demonic Strike, this is range, and he's telling Akamaru to solve this in only 6 play points for just a chance at getting away from all this damage.
So this is the situation that I was kind of talking about. So say for instance that turn 7 D shift was possible, right? In what Akamaru read is as his hand is composed at the moment. Say he deals with this entire board. You still have to sweat that one turn. Every single game, it always feels this way. Unfortunately, I think that Akamaru Red can't even deal with the board effectively this turn. So this might just be it.
I think his last hope is this Kaleido into the Chimera.
Oh, is the Chimera active now? It is. Okay, so he does have a way to do it. So this is
I think he actually has to use the cash on it.
Makes sense. So this is literally the situation I talked about. This is just how it feels.
Right. 2 goblins.
Are either D shifts castable?
No, they're both still in the double digits.
Because this could have been a clean Chimera attack face, D shift attack face.
We've seen that situation happen before, actually. So off the top of my head, I think the only way to survive this situation might be attacking with the Chimera. He can put 1 Guardian on the board. I don't think taking 1 damage off of it is going to make a difference. By clearing a Goblin, I mean.
Yeah, this is put a ward up, attack 6 face, and pray 1 more turn.
He can reduce Fiery Embrace to 1 if he goes for that Guardian line. Oh, it's 0 actually. I didn't notice the Fate Time was at 0. So he can clear 1 Goblin, hit 6 face, and then leave it all in the hands of what Sheepy top decks. Caraboss won't do it. Really just comes down to finding a piece of significant burn.
Here we go. There is something to be said about clearing board here because D shift is castable next turn. So the board state, you're just winning regardless next turn. And Sheepy bricking 2 times in a row.
Goblin
oh my goodness.
into Summon Bloodkin. A 1-2 into 2 1-1s is just not enough.
Akamaru Red takes a very well-earned breather after navigating D-Shift against Aggro Blood.
To be fair, looking at this list, really it just had to be one of the few pieces of burn remaining, that being a Demonic Strike, that double clear set him outside of the lethal range of Snarling Chain. But really, another Blood Wolf wouldn't have done it. It had to be Razor Claw or Demonic Strike there.
Mm-hmm. There we go. Akamar Red essentially getting that ward out on the turn that it mattered. And really just hoping that he bricked. Yep, that's all I can say about that matchup. It feels like it every single time. We saw it here. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. I think that aggro blood is just that one turn faster than D-Shift, unless you run out of gas.
Mm-hmm. That particularly interests me because usually I see decks like this. Well, he didn't find it that game, but they pack Karabos to try to navigate as much around that position as possible. But when that's your only source of card draw without things like you mentioned before, Blood Pact, you can just find yourself in situations where you're praying you draw that last bit of burn, or everything else in your deck is just really it does nothing for you, and then you've lost.
I really think that, you know, some of the players in this tournament, even Akamar Red sitting here, but his blood got banned, opted to start putting Staircase into blood for that very reason. I mean, we saw it used to great effect, especially in our first match, where we were just like, wait, how did this deck just win the mirror? But Staircase is just a really potent card, and I don't think it's been adopted by every deck the same way that Angelic Knight hasn't been adopted. Some players like it, but not everyone puts it in their deck. Just little slight things to notice from these competitive players today.
Right. I find all that to be so interesting because these are cards that, especially in the case of Angelic Knight, it's quite a simple card. It's easy to overlook how much it can change certain matchups. But that said, this is a matchup I've actually not seen happen too often, the Dirt Burn versus Shadow. I'm used to Burn, or Dirt Rune in general, having an immense advantage over every Shadow list, but that has changed over time, because cards like Petrify, Calamitous Curse, and the like, which just slaughter Shadow, aren't really used anymore in favor of a burn-oriented sort of game plan. Do you have any more information on that?
Yeah, this is just basic, straightforward stuff. So Levi is still really good. I mean, it still does a great job of clearing the board before Nectar turn, right? And I think Akamar Red kind of has that notion built into his head. He's playing Andriolphus in his deck instead of more aggressive 2-drops, right? So he's looking to go longer in the game. He's also playing that single copy of Deathly Tyrant that we see in his hand in case the game goes, exceedingly long. Unfortunately, that game plan does not fit well against Burn Rune because it really doesn't give you that much time. And if you're trying to build into this super late game style, then Mutagenic Bolt could come down and ruin literally any plan you could have. So this will be an interesting match. I mean, the ebb and flow of Shadow versus Burn Rune has been that Burn Rune generally is better. But yes, some percentage points did come back because, like you said, Calamitous Curse and things aren't like overwhelmingly being used anymore. Professor of Taboos being another great mid-range breaker that we just don't see very often anymore.
Right. I think maybe even that just comes down to the fact that both of those cards cost 6, and neither of them outweighs the value of Levi, for obvious reasons. He's the only one of any of them that pushes that huge amount of damage face in a deck where that's the central strategy. And Mutagenic Bolt is an answer to a lot of things that still pushes damage in the way that they don't. So it's while it can be played as a value-oriented deck, it's just not really the type of time to be grinding for value, it seems.
Right. So realistically, it's if Akamar Red can stem the early aggression. That's the most important thing. Because if he can, then he can race the burn that Sheepy has access to. If he can't, then he's literally just saying, I have to win before my opponent can burn me out. And realistically, against Burn Rune, we know that you don't have a lot of time when you get like sub 10, sub 8 in that range.
And we already see Sheepy developing towards a Master Mage Levi if he can navigate this turn without using up an Earthright, which I think justifies going for Carl alongside Piercing Rune pretty effectively.
Ooh. I think I would have opted for the Piercing Rune too, yeah, because this is saying, you know what, Akamar Red? You can take out my sigils if you want to.
With a hand with a Halo Golem and a Master Mage Levi, that takes a lot of confidence actually, because Magic Illusionist, this is his main downfall sometimes as a card. He's sturdy, promises a lot of damage, but he can disable everything else in your hand like we might see happen here. I don't see a backup plan if he loses these sigils.
Right. And I mean, if you play that, oh, he doesn't evo it. He evos the Carl here. Interesting. This is probably just to play around the Chimera being easily able to attack into the evolved Illusionist, and this does not make for a profitable attack. So yeah, this is a good evo.
Mm-hmm. So alongside Zombie Party and just really, so Soul Squasher is something he went for. I think he can still play Zombie Party and just evolve something. Actually develops the Catacomb, so he's not able to fully clear out the sigils this turn from Sheepy.
Very big benefit to Sheepy here. But Akamara Red, in turn, doesn't really just straight up lose to Levi anymore because he'll just get a crazy amount of skeletons to back it up if that Levi does hit next turn. Which sets up perfectly for an Ektar turn. So I think this might just be an evolve face here. Maybe not an evolve, but he could.
At the very least, I think he's going to need to start to push a lot of damage soon. He used up a bit of his early shadow gain on that Soul Squasher, which puts him significantly farther back from Tyrant. Especially in lists like this, I think it takes a long time to get that many shadows, so every time you activate a Necromancy, it's not the same as Atomy, who can just rack it all up really quickly.
Right. So I think this is just going to be a full board clear here. I think Sheepy's going to go a little defensive here, which is good. This is the turn you need to play defensive.
The name's Levi. Don't forget.
And if I'm Akamara Red, I'm realistically just thinking, why did I leave him both the sigils going into the Master Mage Levi turn? But apparently he has a game plan around it, doesn't care much.
He could use all those shadows to develop a very, very powerful Ektar here to flip the board back in his favor. But that does set him a bit further away from his win condition, as Sheepy still has a lot of his leader's defense left.
That's right. These players playing very cool and calm against each other. No player going outright aggressive and just like pushing damage. Little trade here, little damage there. This is true of classic mid-range matchups against two very, very skilled players.
So I suppose the question on Akamoto's mind is whether he wants to go for the Zombie Party instead of the Ektar, perhaps?
Right. Oh. Okay.
Develops the Lurching Corpse. I think he could be playing for Shadows here as well.
That's what it looks like to me. It looks like he's playing for that Deathly Tyrant win. And I think that Ektar is just going to stay in hand as a resource if he needs it.
It's very rare that I see a player... Yeah, it's very rare I see a player stay at such high defense going into turn 7 against Burn.
Yeah. And he's doing it well. And like I said, Mutagenic Bolt just drawn now. So now the options for Akamara Red are actually limited. If he ever goes wide, he's got to be careful. But at the same time, Sheepy doesn't really have a board anymore. So if he ever Mutagenic Bolts, he has to be aware of Ektar lethals. So, and there's no Wizardess of Oz in Sheepy's hands, so no way to reduce cost these cards. So he's just going to have to play a very straightforward, just, I got to deal damage over time game plan at the moment.
Right. He has a lot of sources of burn. If he chooses to, he can go for Carl into Halo Golem. Akamari's board is quite small, which can be one of the most difficult things to deal with Shadow. Every small body that's resolved and can attack is a lot of threat and damage from Ektar, but that doesn't by itself often lead to meaning that you can afford to throw away all your removal and burn on everything.
Right. But I think Sheepy has the tools. It really just depends on how Akamara Red plays out his hand. So if Akamara Red doesn't give him anything to work with, then it might be Akamara Red slipping away like turn by turn with just extra advantage.
I think at a glance the one thing I'm concerned about in Akamaru's case is, okay, that changes it a lot actually, just the development of another Demon Eater. I was thinking he doesn't want to play Yaktar or Death's Breath if the game plan he's going for is developing this Tyrant. Because it takes him so far away from it, it means those cards he plays need to have a lot of value that gets him those shadows back.
Okay, well he decides to cash in now with 8 of those shadows to clear board and push 6 damage here. This is not a bad play by any stretch of the imagination. This also says Mutagenic Bolt's not a great answer to me because now I'm ahead on board. If you guys want to learn how to beat Mutagenic Bolt, get ahead of the Dirt Rune player in life total and board presence. Easier said than done in most cases.
Even here, he's locked out of the Mutagenic Bolt just because I think that leaves just enough damage, or 1 damage over, for the Tyrant to kill him without needing any additional damage, or without even activating his Necromancy even. He has a lot of damage in his hand otherwise with tools, but I think it would take a Wizardess of Oz to push all of this out in a timely fashion.
And now if Akamar Red just plays calm and steady, doesn't like overcommit, doesn't do anything crazy, I think he can walk away with this game. Like, for instance, it feels really good to maybe play like a Death's Breath here and, you know, like feel super safe. That's not safe against Dirt Rune.
Perhaps he might try to develop his Demon Eater once again, look for some more options without committing too much to board. Because just one more hit, just a little bit more damage, and that Deathly Tyrant is just enough reach.
Yeah, I almost like Bellinus into Demon Eater, see what my options are, and then play out the other Bellinus. And just keep it nice and slow.
So if you're Akamaru Red, what are you afraid of here in a situation where you're at 7 defense left? How do you find that reach?
Wizardess of Oz, crazy. You know, Wizardess of Oz
really
going absolutely crazy. That's it.
I think he's doing as you suggested, finds another Demon Eater.
Yep, and then just be careful, right? So, like, maybe play out the Lurching Corpse here, and then pass, or just pass. I think the Lurching Corpse is a good option, because if that 3-4 dies, he still needs the 3 damage in play. Opts for the Bellinus. Okay. Also a fine play.
I think he actually only needed the 2 damage, because Deathly Tyrant, I never remember its stat line sometimes, but it's a 3-3. So as long as Bellinus or the 3 survive, he's good.
Right. The other way would have been if the 2/1/2 survived with the Lurching Corpse and the Demon Eater.
And Carl is not Wizardess of Oz, so I think Sheepy's in a really tough position here. I don't think he's lost. There's ways to navigate this.
Let's see. So if he gains 1 here, goes to 6, he can Evo the Carl into the 3-4. If he does that, he's at 6 versus 3, so he still has to clear. He would have to Demonic Strike the 2/2. Okay, it looks like that's what he's doing.
Holy magic is safe. Gaze into the light.
Narrowly skated his way out of Tyrant. It's weird to talk about how much a player has to escape the range of Deathly Tyrant when there's no threat almost whatsoever of the Tyrant actually activating.
Right.
He's
It's
effectively
just
playing
damage.
around Alwithus, yeah.
Yeah, it gives an effect to Shadow that Shadow doesn't normally have. Like, gone are the days of Phantom Howl, and in are the days, apparently, of random Deathly Tyrant. And now Akamar Red just has to present the exact same board state turn after turn, and not really worry too much about it. I think he's playing this line perfectly.
Halo Golem. I think it's more burn that has to be used defensively here, because he's just been out of reach.
This is Halo Golem to kill Necro Assassin into, yeah, like you're basically just in this train that Akamar Red is putting you in of, you have to deal with my board every single turn. If you don't, you die. If you try to burn my face, you die. So I think he's got him pressed up against the wall perfectly here.
Yeah, I think his last few turns especially have been played beautifully. I just noticed that if he had committed the Death's Breath last turn onto the Necro Assassin to try to present more lethal than he needed, then that would have handed the game to Sheepy right there. That would have been it.
Yep. It's absolutely correct. Now, this is a tough spot for Akamar Red again, right? Because he needs to deal with that 4-3. He doesn't have lethal. And he doesn't want to overcommit to the board. And there he goes. Perfectly. Doesn't get the value off of the zombies. Uh-oh.
Ooh.
Here we go.
Could be big, but if there's any chance that this Wizardess of Oz is not going to be good enough, it is entirely contingent upon Akamaru's last play, and then he just denied a lot of damage from that mutagenic bolt. Not a single spell.
Oh my goodness. He does have a way to redraw cards and to put a ward up.
The ward's a big deal, I think.
It is a big deal. He doesn't have any straightforward ways to deal with these followers, even if he wants to Mutagenic Bolt, though. So... Oh my goodness. Drawing your Wizardess after you've already played a handful of spells feels pretty bad, and then drawing into no spells afterwards? Oh my.
It's so unfortunate. He has tools at the very least. I think the Scrap Iron Scarecrow and the Levi could be huge. Akamaru's hand has been, he doesn't really have anything that strictly deals with bodies anymore. The Tyrant damage is prevented effectively by the ward unless he draws into something more. And he's still in that situation where he can't present too much.
So this is the big turnaround. I think Sheepy's really just deciding, do I really want to play this Mutagenic Bolt or not? If he does, he'll die. We know this. And doesn't. All right.
Very, very smart.
Oh, okay. Well, that'll do it. Akamar Red. Finger guns. Let's go. That game was beautifully played by Akamar Red. This is how you beat Dirt Rune, people. Take
GG.
notes.
Wow, so mannered. Sheepy, so nice. Meanwhile, Akamaru is just finger gunning away, giving them the business. Akamaru Red, just like it was for Meow, demonstrating why he is currently probably the favorite going to the Contenders Cup and champion of Season 2. And no intention of slowing down, it seems. Really.
He doesn't lose.
He doesn't lose. So now what we have to do is pit Akamaru Red against Jay-Z.
Yes.
See.
We need to have the cross-region, exhibition match. We should do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's coming. It's coming. Very soon. In fact, Korea, Japan, and Taiwan are going to be thrown into that mix too. So.
That's right. That's right.
We'll see how that pans out. Let's take a look at the standings here. Akamaru Red will take the win, putting him up 1-0, and Sheepy drops down to 0-1. And the only match left for the day today, the last match of the day, Suzzoni and Matt Allen will be coming up shortly. That'll be interesting. Suzzoni is a player that we've talked about quite a bit. I feel like Suzzoni had a lot of time after the end of Season 2 to kind of think a bit and kind of reevaluate the things that he does. Specifically for the Contenders Cup, did pretty well, brought entirely different lists than what he normally plays. But now that we're back in the round robin, it's like
he's himself again, and essentially from Season 2. For those of you who don't know, Suzzoni brought Conjuring Force back to this round robin. It's here. It's the same exact list from Season 2. Not a card has changed. No new additions.
Let's take a look at the bands and take a look at the decks that they're offering up here. Oh, there they are. Look at that. Suzzoni and Matt Allen. And of course, it's going to be Rune and Shadow for Suzzoni, and then Haven and Rune for Matt Allen. Now, we talked a little bit about this. Havencraft can be absolutely deadly for Rune. So then it's all up to Rune versus Rune and Rune versus Shadow if that is the case here. We'd have to consider how Conjuring Force and Snowman does against Havencraft if it's any different, if the story is any different, where those things like the Mighties and White Tigers do actually slow
we
down.
know this story because Matt Allen's actually playing Seraph Haven against Conjuring Force, and we saw that matchup several times last season, and Conjuring Force walks on Seraph. It literally walks on it, and maybe Matt Allen didn't get the memo about Conjuring Force when he plays slow decks. You ban it. So we might see Suzzoni running away with this one.
Everybody must learn their lesson.
That's right.
Everybody must learn their lesson. But we've talked about it a little bit. Let's take a look at it. Conjuring Force as a card. Mofu, now you made a statement about Conjuring Force coming up from particular regions that, typically people put objects in there when they are ready to dispose of them, but they are kind of, resurfaced from this location. Tell me about this card and why you think it was so underplayed, and why you think Suzzoni can have so much success with it.
I think the main reason why we don't see Conjuring Force ever, or often really, is that usually Rune doesn't really struggle to find win conditions, and Conjuring Force is a very clunky win condition. Holding an amulet down, it doesn't really contribute to things like spell boost things or otherwise, but we do see some synergies with some cards like Blade Mage, and in particular, especially I think we'll see this be important in these matchups, cards like Rime Wind and Summon Snow, cheap or tempo-based one-card board floods, which can just turn into win conditions of their own with this card. It's crazy. I have never seen it actually like work that often, other than with this player in particular. So I'm looking forward to seeing it, really.
Yeah, I feel like Sizoni is aspected into ice, right? He eats ice cream, he makes snowmen, and that's how
right.
he wins his games. He is ice aspected. He is our first elementalist on the show. Tell me about the rest of the list, Exo, and about some of the surrounding cards here. Obviously, Rhymewind is a big one. Son of Snow.
Well, I absolutely love the deck, so I'm completely the opposite side of the coin. As a matter of fact, I'm one of the creators of the deck, so I love it. What it does is, it, like he said, you play it as an aggro deck. You flood the board, you try to control the game, and then if you can, you Conjuring Force win. If you can't, you Daria and fall back on the Blade Mage Enchanted Sword combo that we saw the D-Shift deck doing earlier. And then you just try to get extra points of damage here and there. You don't play silly things like Owl in it. You play Levi because it deals damage. You're playing aggro, you're not playing full combos. So realistically, if you're playing against a slow deck, you have a really good game plan. If you're playing against other aggro decks, you can fall short sometimes. So it's not always the best deck to play.
And that's what you mentioned against Seraph Haven, right? Is Seraph Haven too slow? And so the snowmen start building up. And get yourself a little bit of an
To be honest, like Mofu said, had he been playing something like D-Shift, same type of a matchup. D-Shift's very favored against Seraph. So realistically speaking, you're not really at a loss. It's just kind of what you want to play. And Sizoni definitely likes his Conjuring Force.
It's the flavor for Sizoni. And we'll see.
That's right.
Did very well in a round robin in Season 2. Fell just short in the actual playoffs, but we'll see if he can make this happen for Season 3, if there are some lessons learned and some adjustments made. Sizoni kicks off against Matt Allen, and we'll see who gets the first win here between the two of them.
Is fighting in despair.
All right, so he actually doesn't lead with his Conjuring Force. I'm surprised. Very surprised. Actually leading this Seraph matchup into a winnable game. What do you think about this? Bringing Shadow first when you didn't ban Haven, or you might think that your opponent would bring Haven first.
Well, the thing that surprises me the most is if you're playing a Conjuring Force deck, I think that's your like signature. That's like the main character's thing that everyone like tunes in to watch. So not leading with it is really interesting to me too. To take a closer
Even
look
from an
at the
RP standpoint.
especially from an RP standpoint. But taking a look, this just looks like a very value-oriented. Got a couple of slotted cards like Erd and the like, but otherwise, just a mid-shadow list with a couple of tech choices. I think it could handle this matchup just fine. But as we had been mentioning before, I think Conjuring Force had a really, really good position here.
Yeah, and we do finally see. You know what, Sizoni, you always make me happy every time you bring a deck. He is a player that decided to put Phantom Howl back in his deck. And I think it's awesome. I think Phantom Howl doesn't see enough play. I think it's still really good and very underplayed. I don't care if it gets rid of your shadows. It can just win you a game.
I actually have a question about that. While I also love Phantom Howl, I've noticed he only runs one copy. He also only runs one copy of Odile. He also runs only one copy of Erd. How do you feel about cards like this, which have a lot of really important synergies or play important roles, run just in a single copy in decks like this?
So this harks back to when, I've been playing card games for 20 plus years, right? I know card games inside and out. When you know exactly how your deck is supposed to function, it becomes a lot less of, oh, this is a one of, this is a one of, this is a one of, and it becomes more of, this is the type of effect I want, and this is the time frame I want to draw it in. So for instance, if I'm only playing one Odile, maybe that's on the back of 2 Death's Breaths, and now I have 3 6-drops, and that's how I look at it. It's not that I'm playing one Odile, but 3 6-drops, and I want this effect to maybe happen around this time. I want one Phantom Howl, so I have the option in the course of a long game, like having one Deathly Tyrant, to just win the game, and sometimes it can be used defensively to clear the board. So it's about how you think about how they interact with your deck, and less about, oh, that's a random, that's a random, that's a random, and just for fun. You know what I mean? Like, there is a rhyme to that, a rhyme and a reason to that.
I think it's really interesting to see that come from Cezone because I don't see every, or really I don't often see players sort of build even like that. I've seen cards in the past like situational things that aren't useful in every matchup like Odin or otherwise run as one-ofs, but to swap out a copy of a card that would have otherwise been a playset for another option is something that I admire very much. I think that's very, very cool to see.
Yeah, it's literally how I've built decks for, since I learned about how to actually think about it. I actually adopted it from the Japanese. I saw a lot of deck lists just like that, like where it was just like, why are they playing so many one-ups? But I mean, once you play card games for a very long amount of time, you just start to understand why that's a realistic possibility. Like maybe I want to run 2 Priests of the Cudgels and 1 Tina as my 4 slot, so I can have that option there. It's not going to come into play every game, but it just gives you more flexibility within the bounds of a 40 deck card limit, right? You want to have options to everything, especially when you're playing control or mid-range, just so you can deal with more things, especially if you don't know the metagame you're going up against, and you have room to do that if you're willing to take a few, chances with how you build your deck.
That makes a lot of sense.
This is an amazing turn.
I was just staring at this a bit speechless as well, just noticing that Star Torrent that just draws like 4 cards at once and clears the board at the same time.
That's a
seems
feels
like
good play.
angry.
Yeah. That's a feels good play. Sorry, so we interrupted what you were saying.
You gonna mess with me?
Oh no, honestly, I lost my train of thought after watching him draw 4
Okay,
cards there.
fair enough.
But
Fair
yeah.
enough.
I think we said more or less all that is to be said about that. I think that's really cool, and it fits very well into Shadowverse deck building, and I think it's going to be a very huge consideration in the future as well. Because I think games, without information of things like what the next set would be like, I think the gameplay of the game will change very much in the future when we have stuff like rotations, and that might lead to a lot of more interesting deck building as you were excited for before.
And interesting, Matt Allen went up to max hand size, overdrew a Priest of the Cudgel, which would have been absolutely perfect for this turn, so I'm sure he's not feeling great about that one. But does have a ton of removal left over, and it's realistically, can Cezone keep filling up the board every turn to pressure that board wipe? Pressure everything that Matt Allen has, really.
Here we see a pretty fantastic use of the O-Dial. He doesn't have to commit the Thane here, which wouldn't really provide him all that much value into a board state like this.
Pretty terrifying, right?
Gives him the flexibility to just evolve face here and deal a lot additional.
And there's a card in hand that I see over there called Phantom
Just
Howl.
one copy.
What does that do?
Wasn't I?
It will create
lot of
5
damage.
tokens to deal 5 extra damage during the course of this game that otherwise wouldn't be able to be dealt by most of the shadow decks. They'd have to be incrementally valuing up with either Ektars or Thanes. Phantom Howl can literally just end the game when Cezone gets to that point. And realistically, it means that if Seraph ever comes down and there isn't like life gained or a ward put down or something like that, I think Phantom Howl can just win the game. Which means I think Matt Allen's kind of locked out of the game simply because Phantom Howl exists in Cezone's hand right now.
I agree with that evaluation. I think another game that actually demonstrated this really well was earlier when we saw Sheepy have to play around or when he had to play under the threat range of just a Tyrant the whole time that didn't have the Necromancy. Well, if he had not been running Tyrant, then that entire game could have changed. The way he had to play could have changed. And that's what Phantom Howl can do too, in that it's a card that just provides that single option of being able to threaten that much damage at any time. Though, that said, Thane was able to figure it out, but...
Yep, and Matt Allen, I think, just scooping there. Interesting choice. Realistically, I don't think he could have dealt with, if he did Nemus's Decree there, he couldn't have dealt with the 4/4 that was left over. So he just kind of just scooped it up because there was nothing left to do. But, as we said, he was kind of out of options regardless of what his game plan was.
Now we
But
see
Cezone
Cezone
winning
taking
that
out a-
match. Now he's got his Conjuring Force to play up against this Haven deck. I'm not feeling good for Matt Allen here. He's gonna have to learn the lesson everyone else learned last season.
I feel bad sometimes for Seraph because it seems like one of the most straightforward and simplest even sometimes to complete combo win conditions of the game. But it has just like fallen into a position where it's so hard to pull it off against anything lately.
it really just feels like you get lucky to pull it off. It's kind of like old D shift before, like I guess not the oldest D shift, but like middle D shift, where D shift is just something you played for fun, and when it went off, it was nice. And I think that's kind of the position Seraph's been in for a little while. Even with cards like Globe to make it more consistent, it's realistically just cards and decks just became so powerful that they can pressure you so often and for so long that you can't really ever play Seraph.
Mhm.
Now, to the other side of the coin, if Matt Allen manages to win this match somehow, I will be very impressed, and I will say, don't play Conjuring Force anymore. But I would never tell Sony that. Sony can do whatever he wants.
As you can see, the Mastermind with his Yugi starter deck busted out. I've actually really not seen much of this, so I'm just sitting here like a child watching like a movie he's been really like looking forward to for weeks, and just
Oh, yeah.
I don't even know like to what extent Conjuring Force itself as a card is central to the deck winning. I wonder how it operates without it with all these cards, because in particular, I'm a really huge fan of Rhyme Wind as a card. I really like cards like that push your opponent off the board and just flip it into this gigantic presence of you out of nowhere. So
Rhyme Wind is
like
actually a very good card when it's a more mid-range centric type of landscape. Like it's really good against Shadow, it's really good against Midsword, all these things where, you know, bouncing a big ward into their hand and then filling the board with 1/1s, or bouncing, you know, their one threat that they played that turn. It just completely shifts the balance of the game. But we learned last season that Conjuring Force is actually not even needed in the deck. I think out of all of the games he won with Conjuring Force, maybe one of them, if any, was even on the back of Conjuring Force. It was mostly just through direct damage and Blade Mages. So it's in the deck because you might need it, but realistically, I don't even think you need the card anymore.
I think that's actually really cool and goes back to it again of, if Conjuring Force is in the deck somewhere, it doesn't mean you need it to win. But having it as that option adds a certain inevitability to the deck. If you have to play a really long game versus a deck like Seraph, then it just offers you the ability to find it, and then that's it. That's your extreme advantage you have in that matchup.
Right. And mostly it's to fight off specifically decks like this that have life gain in them. Because it doesn't have a great way to always get past that 20 to maybe 23 threshold, especially after like a Curate or a few Healing Prayers or something like that, sometimes you do need a card like Conjuring Force just to push for that little bit extra. You see the emotes coming out. Matt Allen not having any of it. He's got a serious face on.
Doesn't look like he has a particularly good play to go for here other than just to evolve into the Hound. He has a Seraph, but not much to do in the meanwhile. I think this is where we see the big advantage of Sazoni's type of deck, where in order for Seraph to survive against most lists, especially aggro and midrange, it needs to play a lot of removal. And Rune is a class that is really difficult to nail with a lot of value and removal because they get value out of their cards like Levi, and then don't really care about keeping the body afterwards.
Right, I think that's actually one of the biggest strengths of Rune in general, is just the many different ways you have of playing it don't often lend well when you're trying to play against it realistically. Like you said with Haven, like, you know, Tribunal's normally a star, Themis' Decree normally a star, you know, even Black and Scripture, all these just straightforward removal spells. It doesn't really matter when you're playing against any type of Rune deck, right? When you're playing against D-Shift, Daria, you know, old Daria, the new, you know, decks that we've seen today, even Conjuring Force, they just don't do anything, right? Or at least enough.
At the very least, we're seeing Matt Allen able to shoot Sazoni down to half his remaining defense, just with 2 hits from this bird. But I think here comes in a bit of a strange issue with Seraph, and then how much does that damage actually mean when your win condition is completely
Right.
agnostic to your opponent's life total?
Right.
Golly, it's chilly here.
And then this is kind of just like filler turns. This is like Sazoni saying, you're not going to kill me with that, now you have to deal with my board. Realistically, Star Torrents on top of Themis' Decrees means that Matt Allen has plenty of ways to deal with this. But I don't think Sazoni cares. I think he just cares about the spell boost that the Rhyme Wind added to the rest of his hand.
This actually reminds me of, strangely enough, these snowmen, they remind me of Sea Queen Otohime and the same effect she used to have on players back in the day. Of even if Matt Allen has an answer, something that just deals with everything at once like Star Torrent, that doesn't really bother Cezone at all because he didn't commit very much into having a full board. He just played a single card and he already got the tempo swing off of it.
And
In a
here
deck
we're gonna
like this-
start. I was real quick. Cezone is gonna start going off here. He's got the Fate's Hands built up. He's got the Blade Mages. He's got the Daria now. This is like time for him to push. He doesn't have to do it this turn, but he's right there.
That's really interesting to me too, because I think a lot of people who haven't seen him play this before, myself like somewhat included, we don't really get immediately that this isn't all built around Conjuring Force. So I think what I was just trying to say before was just even the Conjuring Force being in the deck threatens Matt Allen to the point that if he doesn't keep answering these efficient one-card board floods, Daria itself or herself may count as one, then at any point, anything you left up might just be what he needs to kill you with.
Right. And realistically, what we can see in hand is 4 plus Evo is 6, plus Sword is 8. If he plays a follower this turn, that Piercing Rune could become active for 10, and then the Daria comes down. So this is just crazy card advantage and damage coming out of nowhere that you really can't stop if you're Matt Allen.
Mm-hmm. He's already been pressured significantly out of being able to just develop one of these Seraphs anytime soon.
Matt Allen doing the appropriate thing and clearing everything off the board.
I saw Cezone looking like he was just laughing maniacally for a second there.
He probably was.
An expression like he's clearly having his own fun with this.
Yeah, and he drew the magic missile off the top, so we already know he has 11 straight damage, even without the Daria. And there goes the maniacal laugh once again.
Now that's just still so interesting to me, because I guess I've already beaten this point to death, but we see Conjuring Force, but it doesn't really need that. It's a tempo-based rune deck, a lot of cards that put on a lot of pressure, and it just works.
Whenever Cezone wins, he just seems so elated. Look at
Well,
him.
he look at the decks he brings and wins with, and people don't ban. And you know, if I'm Cezone, I'm laughing all the way to the bank. You know, what I
Laughing
mean?
all the way to the bank.
all the way to the bank.
Ho ho ho. It's nearly Christmas time. I expect to see Cezone in a Christmas hat.
Hey, don't
Santa
skip
outfit.
Thanksgiving. It's November
Thanksgiving.
4th.
Yep. I just, Christmas time because of the snowman and laughing and being jolly. I feel like Cezone would fit that role real well.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
But takes
He's a
the
very
win.
skinny Santa.
A very skinny Santa. We'll just
Yeah.
have to pat him out. That's what we use Thanksgiving for. We'll use Thanksgiving to prep Cezone up for Christmas. Here we are trying to push some United States of America holidays onto people who are of different, culture backgrounds and locales. Yeah, he's not
Yeah,
interested.
you don't need to celebrate any of these things. Don't worry about it.
No, there's no pressure to do that. Let's take a look at the standings. Cezone 1-0 over Mad Allen using Conjuring Force, bringing it back, winning 2 games there, 2-0, and it looks like Seraph Haven just might be a little bit too slow for what's happening right now in the meta. And I think even if it wasn't against Cezone, probably would have had a tough time trying to make that through. Star Torrent seemed to do pretty well for him in certain situations, but not enough. That's going to mean that Mad Allen, Sheepy, and Dasvi will be the bottom end of the groups at the end of this week, and then Akamaru, Cezone, and Meow are going to be the top end of the group. Next week, that's all going to change, I'm sure, and players will go 3-2 or 2-3 or some variation of that probably, and everything is going to be thrown to pieces. But for now, we have a very clear, nice delineation, right? We're doing okay right now. And I'm excited to see how this round robin plays out. How was the first day for you guys? How did you feel about the competition? Of course, this is basically the first Starforged Legends Shadowverse Open tournament that we've had since the patch that kind of changed a lot of the card stats and costs here. What did you think about the decks today, Exo?
The bar's set. I mean, everybody brought decks that they felt would win their matchups. I felt most players were playing at a very high level. And realistically, the players that weren't playing at their highest level weren't playing that poorly either. It's just about management, right? Like either whether it be Kionis's with time management, or just matchup management, being new to the round robin stages, not knowing exactly what decks you should be bringing into a matchup or what decks to ban based on your lineup, such as in the last matchup where we saw Cezone get his Conjuring Force through against Seraph. because maybe you just don't know how good it is against your deck because you haven't seen it before. So this is, I mean, but the bar's been set. I feel like all the players are playing at a very high level, and I can't wait to see more.
What about for you, Mofa? Anything super exciting? What was your highlight of the day?
Well, this is something that just keeps me coming back to Shadowverse. My highlight of the day, I think, is these personal moments like, I mean, I don't want to make him feel bad for this, but when Kionis roped throughout playing these two very, very unique decks, what keeps me coming back to Shadowverse is players who play with personality and make deck building choices and just playstyle choices based on their personality. I think it's so cool when players like him bring 3 combo decks that are difficult to navigate, and seeing them have to like push through difficult situations like that. It's not that he's a bad player that he roped or ran out of time, it's just that that's how he wants to play, and he had to navigate around a very difficult problem that a lot of other players don't because they play in different ways. I think we saw a lot of that today, and I really love that kind of thing.
Yes, that's for sure. We got to see some Jormungand. We got to see some Snowmen.
We got to see Bellringer Angel and Aggro Blood.
Yep. That's pretty crazy. The Angel is back. I mean, Unico was stealing the spotlight for a very long time, but
Yeah.
Bellringer Angel is back. We should find some of those pins again and just wear those pins. But that's gonna wrap up the first week of the European round robin. Some good wins for certain players and some early losses for others, but we'll see how that shakes out in the upcoming weeks. Make sure you go to @Shadowverse Game. It's going to give you updates on when the broadcast is happening and what's going on in terms of events and other cool Shadowverse things, like all the stuff that was talked about in Shadowverse Next, Portal Craft, the rotational format, maybe the tournament mode in Arena. Some of these things might become more fleshed out and more details become available on that. Also go to shadowverse.nge.io is where you can find information on the Starforged Legends season of the Shadowverse Open, where you can find out information about broadcast times, the players, some articles about decks that were used in the tournament, and all that good information. So that is a wrap. There were a lot of games today, and everything became much more aggressive, but I still feel like the players were taking their time, thinking a lot about their decisions, and trying to make sure they were doing the best for themselves. So
I will say one thing as a closing thought. We can see the metagame come full circle week after week after week, just like we said it will. Aggro into mid-range, into control, into aggro. Like, it's a churning engine, and you have to pick your spots.
And make sure you don't get too far ahead of that curve, because if you out-mind game yourself, then you might find yourself playing some very strange decks against a lineup. Show up to the party with the wrong outfit, right? You're sitting there with a t-shirt and sandals, and everybody else is in suits and ties and
you're
dresses.
just like,
But you're the genius, you know?
But you are the genius.
They're the ones who don't get it.
Yeah. You know? You get it, Mofu.
Yeah, Mofu gets it.
You get it. Thanks again to Exodium and Mofu helping out with the cast. We got to catch a rare caster today, so that was fantastic and very fun broadcast. But remember, tomorrow, same time, same place, the North American group gets kicked off, and we'll see if we can have some upsets or some interesting scenarios come from that. Until then, we are signing off, and we'll see you next time, guys.